Good morning, everyone. I'm Bassam Shakhashiri from the University of Wisconsin, Madison. Welcome to this special symposium. It is sponsored by the ACS Division of Chemical Education and co-sponsored by the ACS Committee on Science. Rudy Baum died 1 year ago last week at age 68. This symposium was conceived and organized to remember Rudy and for all of us here and for all readers of chemical and engineering news to commit to live Rudy's legacy. It is deeply meaningful to me, and I'm sure to everyone here, that Rudy's widow, Jan, is with us this morning. Accompanying Jan is Rudy's sister, Mariana Baum, Jan's sisters, Judy James and Jackie Orr, and nieces, Anna James and Whitney Dawes. Welcome all as we reminisce. Welcome all as we commit to live the legacy of Rudy Baum. A clickable selection of Rudy's editorials and writings can be found on my website, scifun.org, scifun.org. They're all great reads. I invite you to have a look. They were timely when he wrote them. They are timely now. I had hoped that this selection, along with other material related to Rudy, including the recording of this symposium, would be posted on the ACS website, but that's not the case. So I invite you to visit my website, scifun.org, scifun.org. Our speakers will address various dimensions of Rudy's contributions to ACS, and especially to our weekly magazine, CNE News. Their presentations aim to help us take responsible action in mitigating global warming, manage challenges in communicating science in the digital world, better connect the message with different audiences, emphasize journalistic independence, and much more. Each speaker has about 15 minutes to be followed by a 5-minute question and answer period. I ask each speaker to adhere to the allotted time, please. Our speakers are either pre-recorded, remote participants, or in person here. So it's a delicate balance that we have to achieve here. There are 2 changes in the schedule. Dr. Bibiana Campos-Ciejo, who last December was terminated as editor-in-chief of CNE News, has withdrawn her paper. During the 8:50 to 9:10 time slot, we will have an open mic period for audience members to speak about Rudy. A microphone is available, no more than 90 seconds per person, please. The second change, Dr. Harry Gray, our last speaker on the panel, has withdrawn his paper. This is not related to Bibi's withdrawal. So I will be making concluding remarks at 11:30 instead of 11:50. We will adjourn sooner than the 12 o'clock deadline. Rudy Baum was editor-in-chief of Chemical and Engineering News from 2004 to 2013. He valiantly addressed some of the greatest challenges facing humanity. His thought-provoking editorials and editorial leadership made him an icon among the magazine's worldwide readership. Rudy had the courage to express his opinions forthrightly and honestly. He challenged all of us to do the same. Rudy was masterful and perseverant in calling attention to significant connections between chemistry and society, and urging responsible action by ACS members and all professionals. He tackled inherently controversial topics and wrote candidly about, and these are only a handful of what he wrote about: evolution, surging population growth, spreading disease, the ethical conduct of chemical professionals, and global warming. Excuse me. I'm grateful to Rudy. I was grateful to Rudy when he served on the 2012 ACS Presidential Climate Science Working Group, which produced the ACS Climate Science Toolkit. Rudy was thoughtful. Rudy was purposeful. Rudy was a great leader of CNE News. This year, the magazine is 100 years old. We mark this anniversary with pride. In living Rudy's legacy, we have high expectations for the magazine, for the magazine's immediate and long-term future. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker this morning. I'll make these introductions very, very short because each speaker would take a half hour to say all the good things about them. So Madeleine Jacobs is a former editor-in-chief of Chemical and Engineering News. She, of course, went on to become the CEO of ACS. Madeleine is on the board of trustees of George Washington University. She's a longtime ACS member and a close friend of the Rudy Baum family. Madeleine?
I can edit my talk since Bassam has very nicely covered a couple of the things, so I'll stay within my 20 minutes. So, you know, we're getting this up here. It'll just take a second. Perfect. So it's a great honor and really a privilege to be here today to reflect on the legacy of really my dear friend Rudy. That this is on the 100th anniversary of Chemical and Engineering News, which was born as the news edition of Industrial and Engineering Chemistry on January 10th, 1923. Rudy worked for CNN from 1980 to 2012. It's 32 years, 8.5 as editor-in-chief, and of CNN's 11 editors, only one, Mike Halen, worked at the magazine for that long. Today, I'm going to propose, and I think it's pretty obvious, that he was the most influential and impactful of the 11 editors of CNN, the 8 that came before him, including myself and the 2 who succeeded. It's Rudy's long tenure with the magazine, his sweeping understanding of the chemistry enterprise, his courage to take on difficult and challenging issues, and his vision during a time of incredible technological change that were unparalleled. He left a legacy of high journalistic standards and a generation of well-trained scientists. In a few minutes, I'm going to provide details of Rudy's legacy, but first there are some people already acknowledged, but I'll do it again. And there's also an elephant in the room, so I will also acknowledge that. But first, the people. Rudy, as Bassam said, died last year, way too young. He had a valiant struggle with a rare intractable cancer. He was really dealt a terrible hand, but he played those cards with dignity, courage, and grace. And he was very fortunate on that difficult journey to have his lifelong partner, Jan. 2 children, Rudy, Michael, and Grace. And we are privileged today to have Jan, her sisters, Judy and Jackie, 2 nieces, Anna and Whitney, Rudy's sister, Mariana, and Rudy's dear friend, who's here watching this, Denise Creech, who unfortunately had travel problems and couldn't get here. You were the mainstays of Rudy's life, and I'm so grateful that our friendship has continued and that you are here to celebrate Rudy's lasting contributions to science journalism. I want to show just a few slides of family and friends of Rudy that will give you a flavor of who he was as a person. This is one of my favorite, everyone knows Peter Cutts, who was a longtime photographer for CNN and ACS. And this was one of Rudy's favorite photographs. And I liked it so much, I had one like that made of my husband and me. And, whoop, uh-oh, what happened? Oh, there we go. This is just a collage. Rudy loved the outdoors. Wonderful photo with Peter Cutts. One of the only photos that Rudy and I have at work, as opposed to you will see at various functions, because we didn't take pictures at work. We just did our work. And then Rudy relaxing on the Outer Banks. And then Denise Creech, who many of you will recognize, and Jan and Rudy. And then again, Jan and Rudy at the beach. Of course, Bill Carroll and Mary Carroll and Jan and Rudy and I all converged in Dallas in 2019. And Rudy it was at the Botanical Garden. We had a beautiful day. We had fun in the pumpkins. I've never seen so many pumpkins in my life. And then the last meeting that Rudy and I went to, it was in San Diego. That's Sue Morrissey. Everybody will recognize Sue. And then Rudy and I slipped away from that meeting and we went to Coronado. And I want you to remember this photo because that's the casual Rudy. That's the Rudy that I remember. And again, thank you, Bassam, for organizing this. The Committee on Education, the Committee on Science, where Rudy served. It really, I want to really thank all of the CNN staff members who gave me the information that I'm going to now present to you. But before I do that, there is an elephant in the room. CNN has been through some very rough and highly publicized times in the last few months. And I think Mike McCoy, who's here as interim editor-in-chief, said it pretty succinctly in his editorial. Magazines like CNN that are published by professional societies are unique and awkward beasts. But I can tell you from personal experience that CNN is not about to roll over and play dead. And for that, I just want you to think of the ACS logo and the phoenix. And as you know, the phoenix always rises from the ashes. And I know that CNN will stay true to its mission to be an independent source of journalism about chemistry and related fields. Whatever it's going through now, it will emerge stronger. And I know this because I've studied the 100-year history of CNN. CNN has had a century of highs and lows. They were well documented by CNN itself, including in its 75th anniversary issue. I worked there during some of the lows, 1969 to 72, when the magazine struggled economically, laid off people, closed field offices. It was a terrible time. And I worked there during the highs, 1993 to 2003, when we benefited from strong advertising revenues and featured many of the special issues celebrating ACS and CNN anniversaries. There were times in this illustrious 100 years when it may be hard to believe, but CNN was a cash cow for the American Chemical Society, bringing in tens of millions of dollars. And there were times when it was an economic millstone around the proverbial neck of ACS. There were times when CNN fought to be more than a mouthpiece of ACS and for its editorial independence. It went through periods of expansion and retraction. People were hired and fired. Field offices were opened and closed. This went on and on. It's still going on. But the magazine endured, and it's now in a period of what I would describe as the 3 R's: repairing, rebuilding, and reimagining. And I share Mike McCoy's confidence that CNN remains dedicated to its mission of providing credible, authoritative journalism that chemical scientists need. And I am confident that he will rebuild the staff while staying true to Rudy and CNN's values of informing chemical scientists and making journalism that matters. So now I'm going to return to Rudy and his legacy. You're going to see this picture a lot. I think it's one of the best ever. Rudy told me before he died that from a professional viewpoint, he felt particularly good about 2 things: his ability to advance chemistry and chemists through his reporting and writing, and his mentoring of younger journalists. He built on the work of previous editors, and he shared something with all of them. Harrison Howell, who was editor from 23 to 1943, was the founding editor. And it was he who adopted the slogan, the news magazine of the chemical world. This perspective continued with Walter Murphy and Richard Kenyon. Richard Kenyon served from 56 to 62. He modernized the magazine's look and printing. Rudy was intensely interested in how we printed the magazine from many different perspectives: efficiency, economy, and timeliness. When we moved from Mac printing after 75 years to brown printing, it was Rudy who went to the printer's town, Waseca, in rural Minnesota. When we launched a redesign, it was Rudy who spent the night at the printer to ensure that the new design came out the way we had planned. Following Richard Kenyon, there were three editors of rather short tenure, but Gordon Bixler rebuilt the science coverage. Pat McCurdy gave it said it was the glue that held ACS together, and Albert Plant oversaw the beginning of CNEN's recovery from near financial disaster. And he was followed by Michael Halen, who served from 77 to 1995 and created the vision of the magazine that had to be read by everyone in the chemical profession. Mike never shied away from anything controversy, and it was during his tenure that CNEN won its only Polk Award for its coverage of Yellow Rain. Mike also hired Rudy in 1980 and me in 1995. I think both Rudy and I learned a lot from Mike. He gave us this advice: never cozy up to anyone on the ACS board of directors and stay out of ACS politics. Keep your head down. Trust me, we listened to that advice. Mike was ferociously protective of the editorial independence of the magazine, which at times had been sorely contested. I met Rudy in 1993 when Mike hired me as managing editor. We hadn't had a managing editor for 10 years. We really had some problems. Mike had been largely focused on environmental coverage. He hadn't paid much to science coverage. I quickly realized we needed someone strong to head the science, technology, and education department. Well, I looked around, and on the West Coast, we had our superstar, Rudy Baum. Over 14 years as West Coast bureau head, Rudy almost single-handedly reinvigorated CNEN's moribund coverage of research in chemistry, biochemistry, and related sciences as practiced in the western half of the US. He pioneered CNEN's coverage of atmospheric chemistry, the science of HIV/AIDS, the chemistry of fullerenes and carbon nanotubes, and the ongoing debate over teaching evolution and creation science in high school biology classes. He wrote major investigative pieces, and he contributed book reviews to the magazine. But we had some people who were a little out of touch with the science, and also they didn't care too much about accuracy. So in my first year as managing editor, I somehow convinced them all to retire or take non-managerial positions, and simultaneously convinced Rudy to relocate from the West Coast. And then with the vacancies, he was able to hire outstanding science journalists and quickly mentored them and rebuilt the department. Our science coverage soon was getting the highest marks. When Mike Halen retired in 1995, I was selected as editor. Rudy became my managing editor and later deputy editor. We did everything as a team. We built on previous visions of the magazine as a global news magazine. We reorganized, hired new staff with a focus on timely scientific news. We had a news bureau in Asia. We redesigned the magazine. We increased revenues. We had 3 special issues on the 125th anniversary of ACS and the 75th and 80th anniversaries of CNEN. And then we launched CNEN Online, an electronic jobs board. And this in particular was a major coup for the magazine, and Rudy was in charge. Rudy always described himself as an ink-stained wretch. He really wasn't so sure about the online world, but he taught himself everything that he had to know in order to launch this. And every project I've named, they were all under Rudy's purview. Our tenure together was a co-captainship, if anything. And if there's anything that I accomplished during my tenure, it was because of Rudy. And then he went on and took the magazine to an even greater peak of influence and integrity. So many people reminisce with me about Rudy and his values and legacy, and many of them said similar things. So this is a list of what they said was most important to him. First and foremost, editorial excellence and accuracy. And he demanded that from himself and from his writers. CNEN had a detailed fact-checking operation after the story made its way from the writer through the first 2 levels of editing. But it was always clear that the responsibility for accuracy lay with the writer. Rudy was a Renaissance man in so many ways, and he had encyclopedic knowledge about a zillion topics. He could spot something when it didn't look right. And if an error slipped through, he ran a correction. This is one of the staff photos, and you'll be seeing a lot of these. So you may recognize some of these faces and maybe not, but I'm going to be interspersing these. We took these every year at the staff meeting. And yet Rudy taught me something very important. CNEN was a weekly magazine, and we had tight, real deadlines. We had reporters who sometimes couldn't let go of a story. Rudy taught us that we could not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We strived for perfection, as Rudy said, week after relentless week. But we were always aware that if you want perfection, look it up in the dictionary, as it is the only place you will find it. Second, Rudy had a gift for explaining complex issues succinctly and in a clear yet compelling way. Every reporter who sent me a remembrance about Rudy mentioned that they learned how to write well from reading Rudy's copy when he was a reporter and later when he wrote his editorials. For more than 40 years, Rudy was a catalyst communicating the most important scientific topics of our times. Third, news comes first, but a sense of humor is important when the news is grim. One of CNN's former news editors recalls that the magazine covered the chemistry angle on some of the most consequential stories of our time. The collapse of the Soviet Empire, the 9/11 attacks, which Rudy and I witnessed from the TV in our offices that fateful morning, the US anthrax poisonings, Hurricane Katrina, the Fukushima nuclear plant disaster in Japan, the Great Recession, climate change, the list goes on. It could have been a depressing lot, but Rudy always maintained a good-natured sense of humor around the office that we came to see as vital in the serious business of science journalism. From the rotating gallery of comics on his office door, the open can of worms on his desk, and his wickedly funny asides on any number of topics, Rudy's sense of humor could lighten the mood just when we needed it most. For sure, Rudy's decades of work covering the AIDS epidemic, his authoritative voice on climate change, calls for equity and ethical practice in science, and so many other examples where his journalism serves as a beacon can and should be cited. But from Rudy's example, we all came to see how to handle the day-to-day news in our life, and he showed us how a good laugh can interrupt dalliances with despair, prevent us from taking ourselves too seriously, or simply impart a lighthearted moment, a pause that allowed us to breathe and gather critical perspective on the world-altering events we as journalists reported. This also gave many of us a sense of hope when we most needed it. Fourth was cultivating sources while maintaining integrity. Rudy's ability to become engaged over the long term with the scientists conducting basic research and to translate their highly technical findings to broad audiences is a hallmark of his career. Harry Gray and Dick Zare were two of Rudy's sources and later friends. So were Peter Durbin, Jackie Barton, and Peter Stang. And I want you to note the tuxedos. Too many tuxedos. That was so not Rudy, but that's mostly the photos I have. But Rudy never let friendship get in the way of doing the right thing in the story. While the people who worked for him admired his ability to cultivate sources, they also took away this important lesson. There was one memorable example. Rudy and I were both very good friends with Carl Gerasi, a very famous Stanford chemist who began writing novels. Rudy reviewed one of Carl's novels and gave it a really, really bad review. And Carl called me up and complained, "He missed the point of the review." And I said, that's what reviewers, they only have, the book. They can't have you sitting over their shoulder, Carl, telling them what the book meant. So for a while, Carl stopped talking to both of us, but eventually he relented. The thing is, we didn't relent. Fifth on this list is honesty and no funny business. That is what one longtime staffer remembers about Rudy's approach to journalism. As a reporter covering an American Chemistry Council meeting in Florida, this reporter inserted an unflattering description of Disney World. The description was meant to set the scene for a responsible care conference. As he related to me, at the time I thought the description was amusing, but it had no real relevance to the story about how industry executives were instituting their company's efforts to reduce pollution, increase security, and make their operations more accountable to the public. The first editor of the story let the reference go at my insistence, but Rudy dropped the reference, and he was right to do so. Funny business belonged in news scripts, CNN's widely read humorous observations column, not in a news report. Importantly, number 6, always have the backs of your reporters. As editor-in-chief and in his other managerial roles, Rudy fiercely protected his reporters from undeserved criticism. Since his editorial standards were high, he could take this stance, and reporters knowing this felt free to dig into stories and do their best. Rudy could also be a diplomat when criticism or threats arose. One time, Rudy calmed the irate subject of a news story who threatened to sue one of the reporters and CNN over a story he had written. Rudy definitely negotiated a resolution that preserved the integrity of the news story, but allowed the subject to clarify his perspective in a letter to the editor. 7, put the needs of your readers first. Understand who they are and why they read your publication. Our longtime correspondent in Hong Kong recalled that he was hired in 1995 because more and more chemical and pharmaceutical production and research was shifting to Asia. Rudy was fully understood the importance for ACS members of being informed about what was happening in Asia as it affected their livelihoods. Eighth, keep reporting separate from opinions. Rudy's editorials were designed to express strong opinions and to elicit opinions from his readers. They were among the most read parts of the magazine and resulted in many interesting letters to the editor. And I love this photo. When it came to straight reporting, Rudy was adamant that opinion had no place in the stories. During the open mic, I'll tell you a funny story about that picture. And last, remember that your reporters are people with lives outside their work. As many people recall, Rudy could be tough at times because he was a tall, imposing man with a booming voice, but he could even be a bit intimidating. However, he was always understanding during difficult times. He held the hands of more than one reporter going through personal and family illnesses and issues. What we all recall about Rudy was his compassion and understanding and how he reassured the reporters that he had faith in them as reporters and writers, no matter what they were going through. One of Rudy's reporters summed everything up in this paragraph. Rudy reinvigorated the magazine, boldly taking the steps needed to strengthen the content and modernize its look. He guided the magazine like a resolute, burly sea captain, standing strong against adversarial winds, guiding us through powerful currents and staying the course toward the destination he envisioned. So let me close with this tribute to Rudy on a slightly personal note. Thinking of Rudy brings back a flood of memories. This photo was taken as I gave my exit interview. From the moment we became friends and colleagues in 1993, I knew we would have each other by our sides no matter what path we took. Rudy was well-read and intellectually stimulated, and taken together with his literary gifts, Rudy was the most gifted writer, journalist, and editor I had the privilege to know. His writing and leadership elevated CNN in a way that no one ever did before, and it sets the standard for everyone who comes after him. He built CNN into a great magazine. We built a great friendship and partnership. And Rudy and Jan and Joe and I had many memorable occasions together, some of my favorites. And after my husband died in 2016, we continued to have good times together. These pictures are taken in Portland and my patio, and also when Rudy and I played hooky at the ACS meeting. I cherish all of these friendships then and now. My fervent wish, and I know it would be his, is that the current leadership of ACS will continue the magnificent legacy that Rudy left, so that future editors will be able to celebrate many future anniversaries. So paraphrasing Rudy, thank you for being here, and thanks for reading this list of the people who helped put this together.
Thank you, Madeleine. What a tour. Refreshing, memorable, and you know, and in life, success to a large extent is related to personal connections. Thank you, Madeleine. If it's okay with you, we can perhaps defer some questions and answers till the next break. Okay. Our next presenter is Richard Zare, who is professor of chemistry at Stanford. He is the recipient of many awards, including the ACS George Pimentel Award in Chemical Education, and of course, the ACS Priestley Medal. Dick has served as chair of the National Science Board. He is highly recognized for his scholarship and much appreciated for his mentorship. And he joins us remotely from California.
Thank you very much, Bassam. It's a great pleasure to be here and to say good morning to everyone. I have been asked to speak about Rudy Baum, who is someone I knew personally and admired greatly. I did not always totally agree with the opinions he expressed as editor-in-chief of Chemical and Engineering News, a position he assumed in, I think, 2004 and held for 9 years. Baum's editorials often emphasized the dangers of climate change. In that aspect, they must be regarded as way ahead of their times. They were accompanied by strong opinions for and against various proposed actions in letters to the editor, some of which were quite not polite. Rudy Baum made clear that the opinions he expressed were his opinions and not those of the American Chemical Society. And I did witness a willingness on his part of seeing contrary points of view expressed. What I found so remarkable about Rudy Baum was his fierce championing of an independent press as part of the American Chemical Society. Given the present sorry state of chemical and engineering news, with the dismissal of Bibiana Campos-Sejo, the departure of so many other longtime journalists of CNEN, and the announcement that CNEN will devote more of its coverage to what the ACS staff consider important about the ACS, I am very fearful that the members of the American Chemical Society will be losing a treasure, something that I depended on to provide a wide range set of views about chemistry, its advances, and its relevance to society. Therefore, I would like to take this opportunity to speak to you about the value of an independent press. So, what makes me think that this is something that the membership needs? I think of an independent press as informing the ACS membership by analyzing information, encouraging discussion, and fact-checking. It makes the actions of the ACS so much more credible as opposed to being simply self-serving. An independent press includes a diversity of voices and opinions, not just those of the ACS staff and that which the ACS staff approves of. What makes me worry that the independence of CNEN is threatened, you might ask. The transfer of CNEN from the publications to the communications division, which happened back in March 2020, and that resulted in the departure of multiple staff members, happened abruptly. In my opinion, these changes totally lacked transparency. To my knowledge, these changes to CNEN were done without informing or consulting the CNN editorial and advisory boards. When Rudy Baum was editor-in-chief, I served on the CNEN advisory board, and I cannot imagine such an action taken without being given the chance to learn more what were the reasons for these actions. I also believe that this action was done without any input from the ACS Council. Let me read from the ACS bylaws. I can give you the link if you email me at my email address, which is my last name, zare@stanford.edu. But let me quote. CNEN's editorial board, as mandated by the ACS's constitution and bylaws, regularly reviews the editorial performance of CNEN. It serves as a communication link between the ACS Board of Directors and CNEN's editor-in-chief and staff, as well as a bridge between ACS membership and CNEN. Its 7 members include the chair of the ACS Committee on Publications, the board's chair, the chair of the ACS Board of Directors, the president of the society, and 4 others appointed by the board's chair. I would like to know to what extent were these individuals involved in the decision-making? The ACS is supposed to have safeguards in place. I seriously wonder whether these safeguards were circumvented. Meanwhile, CNEN has explained these changes to its readership with deafening silence. On this program is Susan R. Morrissey, ACS's Vice President of Communications and publisher of CNEN. I look forward to any clarification she can provide to what I have reported to you. She announced in CNN that the focus of what I consider one of the greatest benefits of being an ACS member would be redirected to focus more on ACS news. I had not detected a previous lack of ACS news in CNN, and to my knowledge, the approval of CNN had only grown in time under the capable leadership of Helen and Maureen Rui, Madeleine Jacobs, Rudy Baum, and Bibiana Campos-Sejo. To properly honor the memory of Rudy Baum, I call for a full investigation by an independent outside committee of what has happened to CNN. The American Chemical Society runs in large part through volunteers who give freely of their time and their services for many, many hours without compensation. They deserve an accounting. I am aware the decision has been made, driven by members' demands, to return CNN to the publications divisions once again. But I fear that this action may be too little and too late. This troubling matter may only be more symptomatic of a greater problem, namely the American Chemical Society itself. The American Chemical Society prides itself on being the largest scientific body in the United States with something more than about 155,000 members. Current ACS officers are elected often with less than 10% of the vote of the membership. Less than 10%. From what I can tell, the president of the ACS has very little opportunity to make substantive changes in the way the organization is run, which to many of us seems more interested in supporting the well-being of its senior staff and keeping funds coming from its ACS publications over whatever are the wishes of membership and in the best interests of membership. But this is a larger topic for another time. In closing, let me tell you that Rudy Baum was a great guy who gave something like 40 years of his life to ACS service and helped to make Chemical and Engineering News a publication to which the ACS membership could be justly proud. 2023, as you heard, marks the 100th anniversary of Chemical and Engineering News, a time when we should be celebrating the continued impact of this illustrious publication and the legacy of its editors and reporters. I do not believe Rudy Baum would be pleased with the present state of affairs. I'm finishing my remarks here, and they're finished early because I want to give time for members of the audience who might be interested to express their own opinions on the issues I have raised. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to speak with you this morning.
Thank you, Dick. The voice of members is crucial to the success of our organization. And so, Dick, thank you for finishing early and allocating more time for discussion conversations. Are there any comments, questions? Please. There's a microphone here. Come to the microphone, please. Yeah.
Dick, I loved what you had to say. I don't know if you can see me. This is Madeleine. And I wanted to say, I know Rudy would have loved what you just said. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeleine.
Anyone else? Or Dick yourself, if you care to say it.
Well, I just mentioned to you that I grew up in a household where my father had studied to be a chemist, but unfortunately had failed out of graduate school at Ohio State University. Nevertheless, he subscribed to Chemical and Engineering News, and I would find it and look at it, and it was inspirational to me as a child to see it and to understand something about it. I'm sure it had something to do even early then in terms of shaping my own career. I really value Chemical and Engineering News, and I want to make sure that we can do what Madeleine said in terms of seeing it grow again and come back from the ashes. But I think it really takes much work and a lot of people to worry about this to make it happen.
As I indicated earlier, we will have an open mic period, and this is it. This is the beginning of the open mic period. So please step up and express yourselves as you choose. We all have responsibilities as members of ACS, not only to pay our dues, which I no longer pay because I'm a 50-year member. But the issues that are before us are important to us as professionals, as scientists, as educators. And so it's really important for us to participate in conversations and responsible conversations about all matters that relate to the proper functioning of ACS. So I invite you to participate in the conversation. We have plenty of time. And I don't know ACS members to be shy or reticent. Yes, please come to the microphone, introduce yourself, please.
Hi, so I'm Mike McCoy. I am the interim editor-in-chief of CNN, and yeah, I'd like to, I guess, say that I'm as you indicated, Dick, we went to the communications division. We were there for a couple of years. We have returned to the publications division, which is, I think, yeah, the appropriate home for CNN. I also want to say that never during our tenure in the communications division do I feel that our editorial independence was ever compromised, that we were ever asked to do or write anything that by the ACS, by outside influences. And the firing of Bibi was disturbing. The mandate to cover ACS news more thoroughly was also somewhat disturbing. But nonetheless, throughout all that, we continue to report and write the stories that we felt were important. And again, we maintained our editorial independence. And yes, we had departures of a lot of longtime staff members, but we are beginning to rebuild the staff. We just hired a new science reporter, an atmospheric chemist, who will be joining us in a couple of weeks, and we continue to interview and prepare to hire more new reporters. And yeah, I do think that we are rebuilding, but I do think our future is bright.
Mike, I don't know you personally, but I wish you all the best in this. It's so important.
Thank you.
Hi, Richard. I'm Tom Kunzelman. I work at Spring Arbor University in Michigan. And I would ask you, what should we as readers of CNE News be looking for as we move into the future as maybe warning signs that independent journalism is being compromised?
Well, I think each of us will have our own take on that, but certainly I'm looking for what should I say, a critical coverage of what's going on, and a diversity of points of view being expressed. I value that, and I also look for the accuracy and the in-depth looking at how chemistry works, what its advances are, and how it relates to society.
Hi, Professor Zare. This is Sarah Tagan from ACS. I'm currently serving as the interim publisher of CNN. And I am delighted by your forceful defense of CNN. Don't agree with all of the way that you characterize what's gone on, but I appreciate the passion for CNN and the important role it plays in the communication of information about chemistry. What I want to say about the topic of covering ACS news is this was not that we were going to forego coverage of science and business and policy in favor of covering only news about ACS, but rather it's an and situation where we can cover great news about chemistry, about business and policy, and cover more news about ACS. So from my perspective, this looks like an amazing opportunity to continue to grow chemical and engineering news to ensure its continued success for its next century. Thanks.
Hello, hi Dick, it's Raj. So Dick and I go a ways back. Dick, it's so good to see you. I was hoping to see you in person, but we'll have to save that joy for another time. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Raj Mukhopadhyay. I'm currently the Vice President of the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Respect. But for those of you who haven't known my tenure, I started off as a journalist and worked my way as an editor, and I was the founding executive editor of CNN Brand Lab. And I would just like to talk about Rudy's legacy. Because Rudy's legacy exists today, it's alive. So many of us are in this room who carry forward with Rudy's work, and I just want to share a personal story. In 2009, there were some changes at ACS, and I decided to go freelance as a journalist. And Rudy was possibly the strongest force who helped me shape my freelance career. And I learned so much from Rudy. And when I got asked to join another organization's magazine, and I honestly debated that, Rudy was the person I called. And Rudy, being Rudy, was like, Raj, just take the job. If you hate it, you can quit in 6 months. And it was that thing I needed to hear. And so I did take the job, and it was possibly one of the smartest things I did because Rudy had guided me. And my career soared at the American Society for Biochemistry and Molecular Biology. They had something that was a newsletter, and within 5 years, it was a thriving full magazine. And then came the next juncture in my life where I turned to Rudy. My work at ASBMB and my tenure with ACS before had me put on the short list for a really brand new thing that the ACS was going to try, which was CNN Brand Lab, which was going to be a sponsored content studio. And at that time, sponsored content was still a new thing. It was one way that the media was trying to make revenue. And ACS hadn't done something like this before. It was a tricky proposition. And they approached me. And I had friends at ACS. And so I had called Sue. I'm like, hey, do you want to do lunch every week now instead of once a month? But that was, no offense, Sue, that was not good enough decision to jump ship. But I called Rudy. And Rudy said to me, Raj, we need somebody who knows journalism. Because to do sponsored content means we need to know where the lines are. We need to have independent journalism survive without being mistaken for the sponsored content that this studio is going to do. The lines have to be very clear. But the magazine needs to have a revenue stream that will help it survive for the next 100 years and further. So please take the job. I came back because of Rudy. So let's remember his legacy. And remember, it's still living. We're all still here. The magazine's not going to go anywhere. We've been defending its editorial independence every single day, and it will continue to be so. Thank you.
Dick, this is Rigoberto Hernandez. We are, of course, friends, and appreciate very much your remarks. I came up tonight because I wanted to note that I came onto the ACS Board of Directors towards the end of when Rudy was the editor-in-chief, and he did talk to us. He talked to me. I really enjoyed always his perspective. Indeed, he was fierce. He was fierce in all of that he did. He never shied away from saying what he believed in, and I truly admire that. And the remarks that you have made today remind me of his fearness for the defense of the magazine, and I really appreciate that you are also fierce in defending the magazine. That I think is something that everyone in the room shares in common with you. And I wanted to give you the opportunity to close with a statement about some of your favorite memories of his fierceness.
Thank you so much. When I was actually the chair of the National Science Board, which is the policymaking body of the National Science Foundation, I found that Rudy Baum was someone I could go to and talk to about putting forward policy and how it would be received. And I'm telling you that Chemical and Engineering News was the most read scientific journal among the members of the National Science Board. There were other possible journals, as you must know, like Physics Today, but CNEN beat them out. And again, I'm impressed by what Rudy did, and I personally gained from his own help. And I admired him greatly, and I miss him. I'm sorry. Thank you very much.
Anyone who has the privilege of knowing Professor Zare for a long time, he and I have known each other for almost, excuse me, half of our lives. We're about the same age, knows that interactions with Dick are robust, they are vigorous, but always carried out with respect. Dick, you've been very generous in not only our personal relationship, but in our profession. And you're recognized, as I said when I introduced you, for your scholarship and for your mentorship. I can't say that about everyone who is recognized for their scholarship. That is, the mentorship is very, very important. In all human interactions, personal, organizational, in all of them, trust is important. Trust is earned. We all want to be trustworthy. We in ACS, we all want to be trusted. To me, that is the second part of the title of the symposium. Living the legacy of Rudy Baum. So I don't mean to stop others from coming forward and saying what they wish to say. I think it's crucial for all of us to be full participants in the dynamics of interactions. We respect the appointing authorities and their decisions. We may not agree with those decisions, but we respect those decisions. And we all strive for living the legacy of Rudy Baum. The motto of ACS is chemistry for life. Let us all continue to live together, even with a lot of harmony, but allow for dissonance. And so if there's anyone else who cares to make a comment, including you, Dick, please do so. And please.
Hi, Dick, it's Bill Carroll. I want to talk about a couple of recollections of my interactions with Rudy. The year I was president was 2005, and that now seems like back in the days when dinosaurs roamed the earth. But one of the things that obviously we all remember about Rudy was the fact that he knew exactly how to poke the bear. And the bear got poked quite a bit. And I would get letters as president of ACS, and most presidents have had this. And this was back in the days before a lot of a lot of social media. So the kinds of letters that I would get looked like ransom notes from people, you know, where they would be like cut out of the newspaper and pasted. So it would be in 15 different fonts and 20 different colors. And, you know, as president of ACS, you would attract some of our wackier brothers to, you know, to send us mail. So I would occasionally get letters from people who would say, you know, I am resigning from ACS unless you fire Rudy Baum. And I would always write them back and I would say, God, we're going to miss you. Because we give Rudy that space. It's his point of view. And quite frankly, it's one of the most interesting things in the magazine. And if you don't believe me, look at all the letters to the editor that it spawns, pro and con, and tell me that that's not the most engaging part of the magazine, which of course it was. And on a serious point about this, and Madeleine mentioned it, I always found that if you went to Rudy and said, you know, I think you missed something in this story, or I don't think it was thoroughly covered accurately, he would always invite you to write a letter to the editor and clarify. There was, I guess there's pride of authorship, but no exclusivity there. So that's perhaps my favorite memory of him. But my second one that Madeleine will also remember is during that year, a number of us made a trip to China. And Rudy also took the opportunity to poke the Chinese bear in that he sat in his room with his computer and Googled things like Falun Gong, Tiananmen Square, you know, pick anything that you're not allowed to do in China. And he was Googling it until they shut his computer off.
They also shut
He was
Google
actually
down too.
he was just titrating, Dick. He wanted to see how far he could take it before they shut him down. And of course, in these days, it would probably have happened a lot earlier. Anyway, those are two memories. It's great to see you. I'm sorry you're not here. Take care of yourself.
It's a special pleasure for me now to recognize our current Chief Executive Officer of the American Chemical Society as he steps to the microphone, Al Horvath.
Well, thank you. It's always great following Bill Carroll. Dr. Zare, I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to meet. Your reputation precedes you. I'm looking forward to hearing lots of your stories when we're together. Bill, I guess I'm the latest version of the bear, so feel free to poke. It's interesting, and I apologize because, as is typical with every ACS meeting, there are 50 things happening at the same time, but this is very important for me to be part of. I didn't have the privilege of knowing Rudy Baum. I've learned an awful lot about him. I've learned an awful lot about chemical and engineering news over the last few weeks. I've learned about the importance that publication has for members and well beyond our members at the American Chemical Society. And I have a couple of things that I just want to make sure that all of us think about, and from my perspective, that I'm committed to. Number one, I am not going to be the CEO that messes this up. And so the notion of ACS without CNEN is not one that I would even contemplate. And I will do everything in my power to ensure that the success that we've enjoyed with CNEN for 100 years continues, and frankly doesn't continue, gets even greater. Its impact is even wider, and it is set up for its next celebration 200 years from now. So a couple of things. Mike McCoy was kind enough to allow me to do a guest editorial in the current edition of CNEN. Please read it. But let me just paraphrase a couple of things. One, yes, we've talked about things that have happened that we probably don't all agree with. okay. I think from what I've learned, that's something that would be encouraged. Disagreement is good because difficult things require different perspectives. And at times we won't always agree. But my intention in the change that was made organizationally and in ensuring that CNN has what it needs is to make sure that it can continue to do the kind of reporting it has always done and do it in an environment where it is not constrained, but it is allowed to do it with the kind of independence that's necessary to do great journalism. CNN will continue to report on the important news of the American Chemical Society because within the context of the chemical enterprise, ACS is a very important piece of that. We're not trying to turn it into a newsletter, but we wanted to talk about important things at ACS, not at the expense of anything else. That's a mission that's existed for the entirety of the magazine and will continue into the future. Financially, you have my commitment that we will continue, as we've have in the past, to provide the kinds of resources necessary to put out a high quality publication like CNN. And if there are opportunities to invest even more, to expand the reach and impact of CNN, I'm prepared to do that. So I just want to kind of close with one thing. We heard about trust, and I understand some feel that trust is earned. Rigoberto was just talking about this yesterday. Interestingly, I come at it from a different point of view. For me, you have my trust. That's just the way I'm wired. And I hope that you'll give me and our team the opportunity to earn your trust and to demonstrate that any concerns you have, we're more than ready to discuss and make sure that we continue to carry on the legacy of Rudy Baum. And what better way than having a great chemical and engineering news. So thank you for the opportunity for allowing me to speak.
Thank you, Al. Excuse me. Thank you, Al. You promised me you'll be here, and you are here. And that's a very good start. And thank you for your comments addressed to Dick, but all of us heard. And so, Dick, would you like to say something?
Again, so pleased that you were able to organize this session for us all.
Hi, my name is Amanda Nelson. I wanted to speak on behalf of CNN. I didn't know Rudy, but for the last 18 years, I knew CNN, and it's what kept me coming to chemistry and part of ACS, even though I haven't been involved in ACS for over a decade. I am young enough to be the sort of person that gets my science from devices, but I still go to the library. In fact, I'm a librarian now. I went to the library not to hold a book or seek out information. I went to the library to hold a magazine and get information. And I remember the racks in the library that would have nature, they would have science, and they would have CNN. And of all of the sources of information that I would have there at my fingertips, what I wanted to hold and see and absorb physically was CNN. And so I wanted to share my perspective that, as a young scientist, CNN was very important to me to see perspectives of chemistry, not just hard science. And that's what it meant to me. I don't know what these new developments will do for the magazine, but I'm not sure that ACS News would have spoken to me as effectively over the last 18 years. Now that I'm aging out of being a young chemist, I can understand that direction and even appreciate it. But I am concerned for your younger populations being attracted to that. So what's interesting about my perspective is that, I came to ACS for the science, for the chemistry, and I'm here now. I'm a new counselor representing my local section, and I'm here on ACS being part of the governance to perpetuate that idea. But, it was CNN and it was the science, and it's what ACS gives the science that brought me to be involved.
Thank you. And Dick, I know you have other commitments. You told me this. Thank you for staying, and thank you for your remarks and for your commitment to living the legacy of Rudy Baum. Thank you very much. Surprisingly, we are on time. Let's keep it that way. So our next speaker is Susan Morrissey. She is the Vice President of Communications at ACS. She's worked at ACS for a very long time, a very delightful and pleasant person. And she started her career at the magazine. Well, I'll let her say what she wants to say. So please welcome Sue Morrissey. Thanks. That was very good. As far as I could tell, they were doing optically.
All right, so thank you, Sam, for inviting me, and it's an honor to be here celebrating Rudy for this symposium. And I will say that everything I learned is a function of Rudy. So we talked about poking the bear, we talked about members leaving. I guess I'm a product of all of that. So we'll go ahead and get started. Again, I'm focusing today on science communication as I've learned it from Rudy. So hold on a second. It's a clicker. It's a clicker. Oh, sorry. I was going right to the computer. I really do know technology. It's not working. I swear. See, it's not just me. The clicker. It's really a simple click. Oh, there we go. Okay. All right. The key is always to turn it off and turn it back on. So here we go. Maybe. All right, that did not work. Now I'm just pushing buttons. gonna do it from here. All right. Found a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. All right, well, we don't need that. I'm thinking the last one that needed it anyway. So Madeleine, you ran the battery out. So we'll go and get started. So I just want to, again, we're focusing on communication skills and all the things we've learned from Rudy. So he was, as we've heard, a core part of chemical and engineering news for more than 30 years. Pictured here are some, I think, pictures that may have overlapped with some that Madeleine shared as well. These are pictures over the last 12 years of Rudy's tenure, as well as some covers that correspond to CNN during that time. This was the period in which I overlapped with Rudy. So from left to right, moving from about 2000, maybe 2008 or so, and then sort of towards the end, 2011, maybe 2012 on the outside. During that overlap, I've learned so much from Rudy. I, for instance, learned that you can be a walking fashion faux pas and still be a good person. Rudy, who loved to wear his socks with his sandals, and it drove me absolutely crazy. I still don't think it's a good idea, but that is who he was. But I've also learned a lot about science journalism, business practices, and leadership during that time, all while having a lot of fun. So hopefully we'll cover all of those today. Myself, like a lot of people who came to CNN, did not come with trained professionally classic journalism. We learned on the job. And that was one of the key things about CNN. You'd taken people who had chemistry degrees and they would be trained how to be a good journalist. We would learn from our elders, if you will, and then and then train the people who came after us. And Rudy was the epitome of this. Helped so many of us understand how to be great journalists, how to be great communicators, and how to be great leaders. He always encouraged me, my colleagues, all of us to speak up and to take on big challenges and not to be afraid of those big challenges. He was always very thoughtful and supportive when you came to him to talk about those challenges. Always there, always had your back. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So today I'm going to share a few things that I've learned from Rudy in this area. I've grouped those into some general topics, about 5 topics. And so like any great leader, there's a lot of stuff that I won't be able to talk about during this time. So let's see if I can get this to go. There we go. All right. So first, Rudy was a big proponent of focus. And so throughout my slides today, I've had our friend Beaker here, who was during the 2000s, the mascot, as Jan is nodding, right? Yeah, you remember Beaker? There's a picture of you coming. Yeah, so Beaker was the mascot, and Beaker would go along with people when they did various trips. And people would take pictures with Beaker. And so I managed to find a series of pictures that Rudy had with Beaker. So, but in this moment, Beaker is trying to distract Rudy. Rudy is staying focused. He's very true to it. No easy task. But back to our lessons learned here. Focus throughout the storytelling process, starting with researching the story, was always very important. Rudy would always remind us to stay true to that true story that's there, to understand what's at the heart of the issue and not to be distracted by those non-germane threads. When you go to write that story, then you always need to get to the point, and then you need to support that point throughout the story, always staying focused on it. Another lesson from Rudy was how to refocus during the writing process. So whether that came from a distraction or writer's block, it didn't matter. So for instance, you could always tell when Rudy was writing an editorial that he had a particularly difficult editorial, or when he was writing some other story, you'd see him wandering the halls, kind of walking through it. The issue I had with this, though, is he typically did it without his shoes on. So again, I don't know how Rudy and I were friends, right? He had all these issues. But he would work through his writer's block by walking around. So when he was writing his story, he would be sitting at his desk, he'd kick off his shoes. And then when that block came, he'd just jump up and, sort of walk out his writer's block. So I was always concerned that he would, walk around and step on like a staple that was left on the ground or some other object. He somehow managed to avert that danger, but would always come out with great content at the end. Another area that Rudy often talked about in focus, and we heard a little bit about this from Madeleine, was that proverbial can of worms. It was just something that once you opened it, you could not get that lid back on. It was distracting and it would divert your energy. So the idea being, leave the lid on those areas and just slowly back away. And then I'll add another point that is not made up here on the slide, is just the idea of making decisions. Rudy was always a proponent of getting as much information as you can, but at a certain point in time, you just had to take the reins and make the decision. And sometimes those decisions were not easy decisions to make. So that was something that was a good lesson of when to say when and when to make that decision. Something that Rudy was very good at. So Jan, as I mentioned, you're back. So moving now into the content of the story, Rudy always talked about being fair and balanced, but balanced to a point, and I'll explain in a minute. But in this particular picture, Beaker was getting a little outside his element. He's a little wild, like to break the rules. It's a lot like Rudy, right? So Jan always had to step in and keep them in line. So Jan's keeping Beaker in line here. Back to our fair and balanced stories. This is within limits when you're talking about storytelling. I remember a conversation with Rudy once about a story I was working on, and I don't recall the topic of the story, but I do recall talking about the balance of a story. How much space do you give to the various viewpoints? The viewpoint that I was specifically talking about had been disproven. It wasn't really based in fact, but it was a key component of the story, or at least I thought it was. Rudy replied back to me in very strong terms that no, you don't have to give everything equal space. If a point of view had been disproven or is based on misinformation, it didn't deserve the same weight or space that the actual facts did. And this was an important part of journalism. So you really needed to figure out what was the truth and what wasn't. And it was your job to present the facts and the truth of the story. So journalism was not about propagating or giving equal space to misinformation. It was really about focusing on the accurately portraying the facts in the story and getting those out to the people. That's what they were relying on you to do. And that was a very important issue as you move forward, of not wasting space on things that didn't deserve it. All right, our next lesson here is to always be prepared. And again, Beaker has now gone rogue off by himself. And again, these are pictures from Rudy. So I don't know which trip you were on, but here we have Beaker being prepared with 3 different kinds of beer, depending on what mood he was in, clearly having drank some of those beers. And perhaps Rudy has a problem, but we'll talk about Rudy, or Beaker and Rudy. See, I interchanged them and they were so synonymous with one another. But in the context of reporting, being prepared means doing your homework and researching the story before you get there. And as a science communicator, and you go into a storytelling event, you need to be prepared. You need to know your story and understand what it is. But you also have to be willing to understand the information that you're receiving and adjust your story to take that into account. And you have to be prepared for those curveballs that come your way so that you can adjust as you move forward. This is a lesson I learned many times at CNN. One of the earlier things that comes to mind in this area was early in my career, I was doing this big interview with the head of National Institutes of Health, and it was a really big interview. You know, one of those sort of prize things you get. I was a young reporter, was very, very stressed about it. And I remember talking to Rudy and he's saying, why don't you go ahead and put your list of questions together, come see me, we'll talk through it and talk through some of your other colleagues and we'll help you. And it was such a great moment for me because I put those questions together and thought I had really great questions. And then I talked to Rudy and I'm like, ooh, I need to change that. And by the time I had talked through a couple people at CNN, I had gotten to this place with this really great list of questions. And so when I went into that hour-long interview with this really high-level person, I was very well prepared and was able to ask those insightful questions, led to a great interview and a really great story. So our next one here is support. Again, just mentioned the support, but here we are in supporting where Rudy was taking Beaker out to show him the world and supporting him. I think supporting him from not falling over into the river in the background, but maybe he was going to push him later. I don't know. But Beaker did get a little dirty by the end of his travels. So, but Rudy was always an advocate for each of us to support each other, and he led by example. And we've heard a lot about that before in the other stories that were shared earlier. We at CNN were a family, and when you needed help, there was always somebody there to help you. Whether it was helping you talk through an interview like I just mentioned, or whether it was helping you edit a story, we were better when we worked together. And Rudy, of course, was the best colleague you could ever ask for. He was a great manager and a great mentor to so many of us. He would go that extra mile, as Raj talked about earlier, for people who were at various points in their career having tough times, and he would reach out and really help people through it in countless ways and without doing it in a very visible way, right? He was always there for you. He knew he was there, and he would help you any way he could. Rudy would also pitch in and help write stories whenever needed. No matter that he was the editor-in-chief, he'd roll his sleeves up and write the story just like everybody else. And in fact, even as he retired, he came back, Rudy 2.0, to help CNN through a tough time. And so tough times are nothing new for CNN. But Rudy always had your back. A personal story here is I remember walking into Rudy's office one day. I was a young reporter, and I was having some problem with a story I was working on. Again, I don't remember the topic of that story, but I walked in and Rudy was busy working away on his computer. And I said, Rudy, I have this issue. And I started telling about it, and I realized he's really busy. So I said, look, you're busy. I'll come back later. And he immediately stopped what he was doing, pushed in that keyboard, spun his chair around and said, no, my job is to support you. Tell me what's going on. And it was amazing to me as a very young reporter with what I can only imagine was a pretty minor issue. And this man who was the editor-in-chief, who was, had all these big issues going on, stopped everything to help me with my minor problem. But again, that's who he was. He was always there to support you. And that's something that I've always kept with me, and something I've tried to strive to do in my own career, is making sure I'm giving time to those that I'm supposed to be supporting. And I'll end today with some lessons learned from Rudy, and the one being have fun in everything you do. So Madeleine talked about some of the more difficult things, but there was always humor in the office. And Rudy set a great example for that by allowing us to have fun even in the serious times. And Rudy showed us how to do that with at the same time staying serious and even a bit scary when he needed to be to get things done. So he was this perfect mix of all of these big, scary person, but very, very fun at heart. So he always loved a good prank. And I honestly, I don't know, maybe I'm just getting too old, but I can't remember what we were doing in the picture on the left, but we had decorated his door with some silly toys, and Beaker is in a chariot on the end, if you can see. And he was great about it. He would come in and he would laugh and have a great time. And we even switched his nameplates one time so that he was no longer in the corner office. And, at first you was like, we're going to get in trouble. Is he going to be mad? He walked in and he let out the biggest laugh ever and had such a wonderful time being like put in a core office, and probably what is a small like closet office where we put his name tag. He had the best time with that. The other picture here on the right of your screen is a picture that actually appeared with an editorial he wrote, where he donned the aluminum foil hat about cell towers. And in I think Howard County, somewhere local to the DC area, he was writing his editorial about that. So he was always one to get in and be part of the fun as well. But he had that perfect balance of fun and professionalism throughout his career. So I'm going to end today with a series of slides I came across about a year and a half or two ago. They were buried in my computer somewhere, and I was looking for something else. And I was like, what is this PowerPoint deck that I had? One of the hazards of being at ACS for so very long is you have things you didn't know you had. And I had shared this with Rudy a few months before he passed away, and we had a really good laugh about it. But this was a deck that some colleagues and I put together for Rudy's 50th birthday. So some 20 years ago. And I know that because Rudy and I were 20 years apart, so I can judge where things are. But this it builds on the fun we had in the office, and perhaps builds on the fact that we may have had too much time on our hands at some point, but we'll go with it. This was a celebration of a new element called Rudium. And I did take that picture on the left, and I'll tell you a quick story about that. When I started at CNN, one of the things they needed about a year into my career was a staff photographer. And so I said, I'll do it. I knew nothing about photography, nothing. I mean, I knew how to point and shoot. And we went to a new officer's reception, and I grabbed a camera out of the cabinet, knew nothing what I was doing, showed up, and Rudy was like, what do you have there? I had nothing that I needed. And so again, back to being prepared. He went back with me to the office, grabbed the right computer equipment, showed me how to use it really quickly, went back to the reception, was able to do my job. After that, I signed up for a photography class. And as part of that class, needed to take some pictures. So I was outside with a colleague taking pictures for the class. Rudy was coming back from lunch and decided to sneak up on us and hide. So this really was Rudy lurking in the bushes. So that's, again, the fun we had. It was amazing. So a little bit more about rudium. I got off topic. Rudium. It was, of course, discovered by Duke University scientists. There were a couple alternative names tossed around: Dukium, Deputy Dogium. He was a deputy editor-in-chief at the time. Rubium, but rudium was what was landed on. The atomic number was, of course, 50, and the atomic weight was, undisclosed. We weren't going to ask. He wasn't going to tell. We didn't know. The element at the time was found on the mountaintops in North America, but in the 20 years since has been found deep in the ocean in the Caribbean. Yes, so we didn't know that at the time. So science keeps evolving as we go forward. Some of the physical properties are here. Of course, a low flash point, right? Extremely volatile, easily excitable, dense, very, very dense. He was surprisingly loud. Yeah, you could hear him a mile away. And at high temperatures, he took on a vibrant red hue, and under certain humorous conditions would combust. And of course, when exposed to the environment, would generate friction in the form of those letters to the editor. And then we clearly really had way too much time on our hands, right? But some of the known uses are captured here. He could really neutralize those caustic editors. And I think in this case, we were talking about our colleagues who were having issues with various things. He would also form strong alloys with others. He bonded very well, had very strong friendships. And when doped with lower elements, that would be us younger staff at the time, would be that superconductor of hilarity. So we always had fun in the office. So I will say that hilarity captures so much of my memories of Rudy. It wasn't all smiles for sure. There were challenges, there were tough times, but we always knew we had each other. And watching and learning from Rudy over the years has made me a much better science communicator. He's made me the manager that I am, the leader that I am, and a much better person for it. This is a series of pictures that I found. The one on the left is probably late 90s. The one second from the left was clipped off a picture, and he looks very angry there. So very angry there. It's probably early 2000s. Late 2000s is the one to the right of that, where we're celebrating CNN's 85th anniversary and CNN Online's 10th anniversary. So that's the cake that he is cutting. And the one on the right is a picture of Madeleine. You were correct and you said we see this picture a lot. So a really great picture of Rudy. So I will say that I still to this day often think about, what would Rudy do here, and really want to call him up and ask him. And so it's always tough not to. So he was the North Star and the best friend or mentor I could have asked. Thanks.
Thank you, Sue. Let us all work together, regardless of differences of opinion, for the betterment of the magazine and of our society. Because of the time element, and our next presenter has pre-recorded her talk, I'd like to, unless someone is wanting to make a comment or ask a question after Sue's presentation. I'd like to move on to the next presenter on our schedule, and that is Geraldine Richmond. Jerry is the Department of Energy Undersecretary for Science and Innovation. She's a professor of chemistry at the University of Oregon. Jerry received the ACS Award for encouraging women in the chemical sciences, and of course the ACS Priestley Medal. I'm proud to say that I'm thankful to Jerry because she served on the 2012 ACS Presidential Commission on Graduate Education in the Chemical Sciences. So if we push the button. We will hear from Jerry.
Good morning, everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be with you as we honor Rudy, and especially his legacy, which I see as one of the most important things that he did. And that was to call attention many, many years ago in his editorials to help fight climate change and make people more aware of it. Well, today in this position that I now hold in the Department of Energy, I'd like to talk about what we're doing as Undersecretary for Science and Innovation to help fight the horrendous climate change effects that we are seeing every day around the world. So with climate change, we know that time is running out and we have to act very quickly. We've seen the horrific rainstorms of the recent weeks, snowstorms in the mountains and the droughts. We've seen it all over the world, from the rising waters in Vietnam to the savannas drying out in Africa, to the unpredictable storms in India that used to be predictable almost to the hour. Time is running out. This administration and President Biden has set us an agenda that's very aggressive, but we really need to meet it. And that is, as you see here, 2030 reduce net greenhouse gases, 2035, 100% carbon-free electricity, and 2050 net zero emissions. I tell you, we are on it. This is a new DOE like I've never seen before, with an accelerated mission to address the issues of climate change. So let me tell you a little bit about what that means in the Department of Energy, because most of you probably don't know the org chart, as I didn't when I took this post. The Department of Energy, in terms of research and science and development, is really comprised of 3 undersecretaries sitting underneath the Secretary of Energy. The Nuclear Enterprise, which oversees nuclear security. And my area, which is to oversee the Office of Science as well as the Applied Energy Programs. And then a third, which has just been formed, which is really to deploy all of the energy discoveries that we've made to go out into the field and make them operational to work for people all over the country. And so these are 3 undersecretaries are tied together like never before. But that includes ARPA-E also, who is tied in with us, in order to really get programs all the way from fundamental science to applications, to demonstration, and to deployment. We are accelerating this by being so well connected. So for those of you that may not know much about the Office of Science, this is actually my area. They call me S4, and these are the areas that I oversee. I oversee the Office of Science, which is all the incredible discovery sciences the largest funder of physical sciences in the world. And in fact, it's, as you can see here, nuclear, high energy physics, all the different physics areas. In addition to our basic energy sciences, our largest part of the Department of Energy, everything having to do with materials and electrochemistry and a whole range of different things, solar energy, all the fundamental discovery science that underpins the energy solutions that we need. And biological environmental science, again, geared very much towards the issues of climate change, and our advanced scientific computing research, exascale computers, high performance computing that really allow us to do the kind of modeling that we need to do in order to move forward. Then on the other side of my portfolio is all the applied energy sciences. And so this, you can see all of them listed here. Now, historically, the basic have stayed on one side and the applied have stayed on the other, and there hasn't been much mixing between the two. However, with the urgency of climate change, they can no longer sit as silos. And so we're directly connecting them with the fundamental science, with the applied sciences in ways that are really connecting these dots that I have here, basic energy science, all the way to AI and hydrogen and transportation. And then our physics programs also reaching out to across the aisle to our nuclear energy programs. You can see it's that fundamental science is so important, but it's got to go someplace. And we are on a mission to make sure it goes someplace. And then we pass it on off to the deployment area. But what's going on in energy right now is just terribly exciting. I could spend a lot of time on it, but I hope many of you are considering or thinking about seeing how you can get engaged also. And of course, our advanced scientific computing, which really is connected to everything with the, especially advances in quantum and AI, all these things are needed. More efficiency in our high performance computing, all tied together. So in the portfolio is also our DOE national laboratories. I oversee 14 of those 17 national laboratories, and they are the ones that are really the engines of what we were doing with regards to developing new ideas, but also they are a mix of the basic and applied sciences, and they work in teams together, and they're just so driven now to address these issues of climate change. In addition, in these laboratories, in the Office of Science also has 28 user facilities, which are just amazing places for companies to come in, for universities to collaborate with us on energy work also. And of course, our laboratories are all connected to universities, and of course, DOE funds universities. A number of you in the audience, I'm sure, are familiar with that. So in addition to the light sources and the neutron sources, and a lot of work done with isotopes and the new exascale computing, we are all set up and driven to solve the climate crisis. And in ways I've never seen before, and I've worked around DOE for about 40 years now. So let me tell you a little bit about some of the programs that we have going on. And one of the most important programs, I think, certainly within my area, are these Earth shots. These energy Earth shots are really identifying places where our RD&D needs serious breakthroughs in order to get to the decadal goals that we're looking for. They are necessary and they are urgent. And these Earth shots go across the fundamental to the applied areas and then passing on to the deployment area. But these each have decadal goals. As you can see what I have here: advanced reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, overcome difficult to solve remaining technology barriers, make sure that we're leaders, and also to engage stakeholder groups everywhere. So let me go through a few of these Earth shots. If any of you are thinking about writing proposals to the Department of Energy or want to see where you might push your programs a little more towards these really national goals to get at some of the most important issues that we haven't been able to solve yet. So our first one is certainly carbon negative, our carbon negative shot. And so what we need to do is we also need to be able to collect carbon dioxide in the air in addition to carbon dioxide that's coming out of a plant. And also the fact that we would like to be completely fossil fuel free, but we never will be. So we have to be able to make sure that we can continue to continue to pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. And so that's why we have a number of different research projects really to capture that carbon dioxide from smokestacks as well as from the ambient air. And there are challenges here, anything having to do with materials or how to change that carbon dioxide into a polymer. All of these things are, and catalysts, all these things are terribly important as background for how we can reach the decadal goals of less than $100 per 10 hours of storage in 1 decade. Those are our goals. And these goals have been put together by talking to stakeholders, talking to companies. What kind of cost do we need to get this down to in research in order for them to adopt it and it becomes commercial? Another one, which is a big one, and a lot of different states are buying for them, are hydrogen earth shots. That's to be able to get hydrogen down to $1 a kilogram of clean hydrogen in a decade. In order to do that, we need a lot of good electrolyzers. We need to be able to get these, be able to enhance this carbon capture for current hydrogen production technologies. Bio-based approaches are really important too, as well as safety standards and sensors to support the infrastructure. There is so much promise in hydrogen, both as an energy and as well as a storage device itself. Third is the current energy earth shots and what those goals are. In this case, long duration storage is the third one. And that's to get it down to 90% cost reduction by 2020, plus 10 hours of storage, 1 decade. We're after 10 hours of storage at least before we can really believe that we've achieved our goals. And there are all kinds of technologies in order to do that. As you can see here, whether it be electrochemical, mechanical, thermal, there's a lot of different ways that we can do this, or a combination of all of them, but we need to do all of these in order to make progress for this first goal in 10 years, 10 hours of storage. And we need a lot of research and development in power conversion, both high energy power voltage applications, such as even, as I have here, packaging, thermal management, controls, and innovative materials. Number 4, enhanced geothermal, the heat's beneath our feet, and that's energy beneath our feet. There is so much to be done in this area too. Having to, and even think of material science, where you've got to be able to have a material that can go and withstand those very high temperatures of the earth, to be able to bring up that kind of heat that we need in order to have geothermal become more widespread use than it actually is today. And again, a goal for commercialization, 90% cost reduction by 2032, I guess I should say, $45 per megawatt hour, and then also by 2035 overall. So optimization of reservoir production, larger plants to accommodate higher flow rates, materials for extreme conditions. That's cost reduction from what we have now at 2022 to 2035, if that was confusing. Also, the floating offshore wind is one of the newest ones. And you see here, we got to get those big turbines out in the ocean without perturbing the whales and fish. But we have tremendous amount of energy that we can get from those turbines cycling around. But there's a lot of science to be done in there. There were rare earth elements that we have to make sure that we have the supply chain for, but new manufacturing methods to make these turbines so that they're recyclable. Right now, these turbine blades, they last about 10 years. And then what do you do with them? Stack them up. So what we need to do is make them more recyclable materials. So there's a lot of systems engineering associated with this too. We've got to get the power from the turbines back onto land. That's also a big challenge, as well as be able to model and simulate for environmental and ocean system dynamics. Again, a lot of great challenges here, but we've done the modeling to figure out that this is what we need to do. We need to get to this goal in order to get there. And that's why with all of these, the Office of Science is working on these, the applied areas are working on these. We're building demonstration projects so companies can see how it can go forward and so forth. And finally, not last but not least, industrial heat. And that is we have a lot of heat that comes out of industrial processes, whether it's making steel, for example. We have to figure out how we can do this better for direct electrification, with a direct electrification, to get the carbon dioxide, lower the carbon dioxide from these processes that end up in the atmosphere. We have a lot of modeling and simulations and demonstrations that need to be done, and also new processes through biology. As well as, for example, for a number of different ways of making materials that otherwise would take a tremendous amount of industrial heat. So those are the 6 we've got so far, and I've rattled them off as fast as I can, but you can easily go to the DOE website and find more. But we're not done. We're not done. I think we'll do 2 more. But these are the other cross-cutting areas that we see as really important. Now, critical minerals and materials is a horrific, challenging issue, but we really need to pay more attention to it to make sure that we can get those materials for what we need for industrial processes as well as commercial processes without having to rely on other countries that we may not share their values. So in this case, it's really important for us not only to be able to find out where those materials and minerals are, but also to have to be able to produce them, to clean them up to the level we need to have them, to process them in very environmentally respectful ways, as well as for mining too. We got to be all green in this. So also energy water nexus, fusion energy, grid modernization, industrial decarb will probably be the next one. But all of these ones, again, we're working at across the DOE to try to find solutions for these. But I have just a couple more of those, but that doesn't mean that all of these processes aren't going on also. They're cross-cutting issues that are continue to go on. But what's really been amazingly helpful in all of this is the new laws, which really will revolutionize US energy in this country, and particularly for climate change. So we have the BRAIN, which it really invests in cutting edge science and innovation to boost the American competitiveness, not only for, in this case, for chips and science, which is for semiconductors, to bring jobs and supply chains home. The BRAIN is really important. And we've gotten some $50–60 billion to help semiconductor manufacturers make sure that their plants are here in the United States and the workforce is generated here in the United States. And then for the Department of Energy in particular, the backbone. And this is the bipartisan infrastructure law. Now, bill, which was passed in November 2021, is also amazing. It makes the largest long-term investment in our nation's infrastructure in nearly a century, providing $62 billion for DOE to deliver more equitable, clean energy future by investing in American manufacturing and workers, by expanding access to energy efficiency and clean energy for families, communities, and businesses, and also by delivering reliable, clean, and affordable power to more Americans and building technologies of tomorrow through clean energy demonstrations. A large portion of this funding is in the Undersecretary's Office for Infrastructure, but we also have a good bit of that in our applied sciences area also, which are really building demonstration plans to take things further. So there's a tremendous amount of work being done right now, especially as this companies look to really and to be able to build what we need to have in this country to give us the kind of infrastructure that allows us to do the energy transition. And it's very exciting day to day to hear of the new companies that are coming into the US and really wanting to invest in this areas. And the bipartisan infrastructure law helps that investment go further. And the third is the lungs. And that's where the IRA comes in. And that's the Inflation Reduction Act. This breathes life into our clean energy economy by incentivizing deployment of clean technologies and lower energy costs for American families. It revolutionizes our economy and our energy system over the next decade in three ways. One, by consumer savings. Two, by American manufacturing and jobs. And three, by communities, making communities ready for the clean energy transition. IRA has many tax benefits for companies, but they also have a lot of tax benefits for you. They have incredible tax benefits for you. For example, if you want to put solar panels on your roof, the reduction that you get on your taxes is 30%. Say you want to have a storage device at your house, 30% on tax reduction. Of course, you have to pay taxes in order to get the reduction. But one heat pump, 30% reduction. This is really getting into communities that we really need to get these new energy transition to be happening in your homes and other homes. And of course, we can all play a really important role in our own homes by conserving energy as much as we possibly can. And to go to, and there's also tax reductions for getting an EV and even getting a used EV. So there's a lot here for everybody, not just the big companies, not the, or any other companies, but it's also for all of us to be able to become more energy efficient. And with all of this, the workforce. So there's so much to be done. And it's so exciting to see young people really wanting to work in this clean energy space because it's so important. If you want to learn more about these different programs, how you can save money by going greener and save energy, please do go to the energy.gov website. It also has a lot of information about jobs and different ways that your students, if you have students or postdocs or anyone that wants to change jobs, we have a lot of jobs open in the Department of Energy. And our 17 national laboratories are real gems. And they work in teams in a very inclusive environment in order to make all of this go. So look into what we've also got going on at our laboratories in all the areas that I showed you before with my dots with regards to the basic sciences as well as the applied sciences. It is indeed a new day at DOE, and I'm excited to be part of it. We also want to make sure in doing this that we leave no community, no talents behind. So as you see the quote here, when you hear President Biden say he wants to build a better America, he means a more equitable America, a more inclusive America, and a more just America, and we'll build it with clean energy. And that's a quote from Secretary Jennifer Granholm, who is the leader of all of us and absolutely amazing. This means that not only do we need to make sure that we're going into very rural areas of the country, we have a lot going on in that respect, but also in native tribes. The reason I'm not with you today is I'm on my way to Anchorage to look at what we have going on in our Arctic energy area, in which we're working in the remote areas of Alaska, where they don't have easy access to electricity or heat, but yet they see the ravages of climate change with the permafrost melting. It is urgent. It is urgent in Alaska. It is urgent in Hawaii. It's urgent for all of us. It's urgent for all of us to get busy and try to solve this climate crisis. And so it's all hands on deck to save the planet. And you know what, Rudy, if you're up there, I hope this at least gives you a smile. Thank you for letting me be with you here today.
Thank you, Jerry. Rudy called for action by his writings. Jerry is calling for action by all of us, all in keeping with our motto, chemistry for life, and connecting chemistry with society. So we will now adjourn for a break, but we will reconvene promptly at 10 minutes after 10, because our next speaker is going to present remotely. So thank you. Thank you all for being prompt and getting back here on time. Our next presenter is doing the presentation remotely. Dominique Brossard is professor and chair of the Department of Sciences Communications at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Dominique also serves on the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine's Board on Life Sciences. She is a leading authority in all aspects of science communications in our digital world. Please join me in welcoming Dominique.
Thank you so much, Bassam, and thank you so much for this kind invitation. It's really an honor to be speaking today to you all and remembering Rudy Baum and his legacy. And as we reflect on the best way to communicate in digital words, I like to remember and remind us of the words of Madeleine Jacobs, former editor-in-chief of CN and retired CEO of ACS, that stated that Rudy was a brilliant voice and leader for ensuring that the global chemistry community and public at large received accurate and timely information about the most important issues of our time. A true Renaissance man, and I think it's hard to say that better than Madeleine, but also Tom Connolly, the current CEO of ACS, remembering Rudy, stressed how he was willing to take on controversial subjects and speak with convictions about around the issues that are facing the chemistry enterprise. And this is something I'd like to focus on today, as we think in terms of continuing Rudy's legacy and making sure that we do that properly, what are the current and upcoming challenges for communication practices and, as a social scientist myself, communication research in the context of scientific controversial issues? So the first thing, and Rudy was really keen to address this, is making sure that we understood there's no simple answer to communicate controversial science. Although there's still a myth out there that just explaining the science is the key to a misinformed public, Rudy and other excellent science writers as him knew very well that knowing more about the science issue, understanding the science, did not mean and does not mean that people will always change their attitudes and behavior in a way to be, the most positive in the world and make sure that our society is resilient and vibrant. Because people do not only use knowledge when forming attitudes towards science, they also use mental shortcuts as political ideology, religious beliefs, what they see in the news, the movies they've seen, what their friends talk about, and so on, what we call in social psychology mental shortcuts. And it's actually really enlightening when we read Ruby's writing pieces that he was keen to actually use metaphors and other, science writing tools to make sure we do that. But I think we need to remember that as we move forward, that only explaining the science is not obviously always the best way to go. And I'm very excited to see that you have speakers in the panel following me that will stress this as well. And the reason why, this is the case is because what we call low information public makes sense of information through different filters that can be, the amount of information they already have in their mind, but can also be the way the media around them interpret and define an issue. And of course, as I was just telling you, all those filters that we use to make sense of complex science issue and, and make them digestible by our very busy brain. And so depending on the specific context in which each audience operate, these social psychological processes will take place in very different ways. And I know that later in the panel, you will have somebody that actually is going to explain how to design those messages and make them fit specific audience. So the challenges of opportunities as we move forward will actually encompass different elements. First, is it really about trust in science that we should think about? Second, what does it mean to think misinformation in a digital world? Third, what are, the role algorithm and social media play in science communication? And we will end up with a big picture. So obviously, and I think this was clear from Ruby's legacy, just thinking about science as a monolithic, enterprise misses the point in the sense that there are multiple science, even chemistry, right? Organic chemistry versus other type of chemistry and so on. Different type of science that actually will be part of a big picture we need to solve the complex problems of this world. And simple monolithic conclusion miss the point when we think about communicating science. And this is actually the key when we think about trust in science in the United States. Although there is, largely support for the scientific institution in the United States, we can see when we ask scientific community at large as an institution that partisan gaps are increasing. So obviously we need to be aware of that when we think about communicating science. But most importantly, if we look at trust in a lot of different elements in the United States right now, you look at the last column here, 2021, you can see that actually trust in a lot of things are declining. Medical scientists and scientists, yes, but also the military, police officer, public school principals, religious leaders, journalists, actually was always low, as you can see, elected officials and so on. So the point that I'm trying to make here, it is not only about trust in science, it's about trust in institutions in general that are declining in United States. And then when we move forward, and particularly as we think of the digital environment, we need to think about trusting whom. So job ratings at many key federal agencies are declining. Rating at the CDC is at a new time low. Actually, I've been working with the National Academy of Science in different, projects to restore trust in public officials and CDC. And this is really, I think, something we need to think about when we think about communicated science more than trust in science per se. So we wrote a piece with the different colleagues where we actually talked about that trust fallacy. So, and I think remembering Ruby is really important because he had a respect for his audiences. So it wasn't the audience is wrong, the scientist is right, but really talk about, how we can build bridges and actually make sure that everybody involved in those controversial issues get to actually have a stage. Which leads me to the second point I wanted to make today, the issue of misinformation. You've seen a lot of things around say, this is all about misinformation. We need to correct the myth. We need to communicate facts. And unfortunately, it's not so easy because sometimes correcting misinformation may missing the point because we know, as I was telling you, that just knowledge and facts is not the only way people actually end up forming attitudes about science. It may be the social, political, cultural context. As I was telling the media, they read, and obviously their own characteristics, such as their, social networks, their digital network, but also, the community which they live, the leaders they trust, and so on. And that trust in messenger, obviously, is something you're going to hear about other speakers in this panel, because most often it's not that people deny a science. They use the science that support their belief, and the science they use may not be good science. It may be science that's retracted. It may be science that be debunked, but people continue to use them. So in this case, I would say, it relies upon the scientific institutions to make sure that retracted papers are taken out of the online archives, that that this is something that will, move forward in a positive way, because as Retraction Watch, an organization that look at the number of retractions in scientific papers, has shown recently, papers that are retracted, therefore not supported by science, get cited more after they're retracted than before retractions. So basically, audience do not even know that this is the case. Obviously, the new algorithm media ecology is crucial to take into account as we move forward and try to actually make sure we respect Ruby's legacy. And the new digital news report in 2021, looking at where people get their news, you're not going to be surprised that actually a lot of people get their news mainly from social media. This is a graph that shows around different parts of the world here. The Americas, 42% of adults that are online gets their news exclusively in social media. Really a problem. That means that journalists and so on are not vetting this content, and science writers that actually know the content may not be actually the voices that are heard. If you add to that the fact that on social media, you can add different diverse emoticon, like the one I show here, research has shown, including the one from our lab here at UW-Madison, that these type of emoticons will impact how people process information on social media. So really, the opportunity for us here is continue this type of research and correctly identify the informational context, networks, and influencers that are likely to influence audience. In a nutshell, there's no science communication, one size fits all. It gets complicated because that if it's science, I'm not talking about disinformation that's supposed to persuade people because of malevolent, intent. Science that's really not good, that people believe for wrong reasons, they get sent around for many reasons. It may be because it makes people angry, but it may be because it matches their worldviews, what we call confirmation bias. If we don't like GMOs, we're going to see an article that says that GMOs has health consequences, even it's been debunked, we're going to send it around. But it may be because they give us hope. I work with the Alzheimer Association here at UW-Madison. And if you have Alzheimer, patients in your family, anything that seems to indicate that it will give you hope for your loved one, sorry about the dog, you're going to send it around. Along our college students, they send around things that are amusing and so on. So, of course, human psychology is at play. And of course, humans have something to do. But at the end of the day, intelligent algorithms that actually sending us what we want to see are the issue. Finally, science moves fast and it's uncertain by nature. A single analysis in Nature recently showed that there was an iceberg of uncertainty when we were communicating about COVID-19, that, science was actually uncovering, new scientist fact as more data was collected. So communicating science in a context of uncertainty is certainly, complicated. And in the digital environment, I urge all of us to make sure that we take into account the fact that audiences need to understand the way science is conducted. So we've partly created that challenge for ourselves. Scientific expertise is not everything. It's one voice in the policy context. Those policy contexts differ. We need to make sure that voice takes into account those uncertain elements. So finally, where are we going next? Unfortunately or fortunately, we are in an area of really rapid development. We have a conversion of consumer data, everything we do on our phone, on our computer, and so on, that is collected by different organizations, combined with genetic data and intelligent algorithms, make a world where intelligence is actually something we haven't even thought about. And DeepMind in Google is continuing thinking about this, although they haven't delivered the ethical board they had promised when in the context of AI. And you've seen a lot of news items about what all the ethical components of intelligent algorithm, and that, it's going faster, that society capacity to be able to deal with that as we move towards a world where consumer data, genetic data, and intelligent algorithms are coming to play and being really an extremely big part of society. So in a nutshell, what I would like you to leave you with is, yes, we want whisper innovation, but only all of us together in the scientific community, by raising those ethical issues, we may be able to move forward in this area of conversions of all those technology. Good science communication, of course, yes, but we still need to figure out what it means in our algorithm-centered society. And only all of us putting our head together, we can make sure that this happen and truly honor Ruby's legacy. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to the question, but I just wanted to leave you with a few elements of research that goes on in the world of science communication, with the Oxford Handbook of Science Communication, introducing Kathleen Jamieson that will be in this panel later on. And also the idea that in different institutions, including mine, we realize that PhD in chemistry and other disciplines need to have that knowledge of social psychological process related to science and take things such as the minor in science communication. So I am confident that altogether we can move forward and continue Ruby's legacy. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward for questions.
Thank you, Dominique. Vibrant as always, Dominique. Thank you. Thank you so much. And any questions, comments? I'd just like to say that in our effort, we yearn to successfully communicate not only with each other in chemistry, but with the public at large. And I'm reminded of the quotation attributed to President Lincoln, and I shall read it to you. Public sentiment is everything. Public sentiment, he says, is everything. With public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. That is at the heart of what Dominique and others on this panel today are dealing with.
Bassam, thank you so much. And I'm going to like steal that quote. It's excellent.
Come to the microphone, please. Identify yourself and speak.
Hi, Dominique. I'm Tom Kunzelman, and I teach at a small university in Michigan. I don't know if I'm going to be able to ask a question. My mind is swirling with everything that you talked about. But I run a YouTube channel and a TikTok channel that's intended to interest people in science with the underlying goal of trying to generate trust in science. And a challenge that I experience is on these platforms, I need to communicate scientific ideas within a minute, and therefore cannot go into the depth necessary to allow for a full understanding. And I think you can understand how that might lead to misinformation in certain contexts. I would just like to hear your thoughts on my dilemma.
That's an excellent point. And I think the fact that you're aware of this situation obviously is up to your credit. And really outline what I was trying to communicate, that this is complicated. There are actually some, approaches to doing so. And I can talk to you outside of this platform, where, there's different ways to go from like complex communication to simple communication. And the idea is like, what do you want to leave in the simple communication, right? What are the elements that you want to communicate in that simple, short 1 minute video that would, to some extent intersect with the long one. So it's kind of like, when we do a slideshow, we're like, what are the main points we want to leave the person with? So if it's like a 15 minutes presentation, we have those 3 main points, we elaborate. It's 40 minutes, we like each point, but we elaborate more. So there are ways to, to communicate complexity in short terms. We have a class at UW-Madison that address that. I'll be happy to put you in contact with some resources to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dominique. Thanks again, dear colleague. Appreciate your contributions to this symposium. Our next presenter is from the University of Pennsylvania. Kathleen Jamieson is Professor of Communication and Director of the Annenberg Public Policy Center at the University of Pennsylvania. In 2020, Kathleen was awarded the National Academy of Sciences Public Welfare Medal, the highest award bestowed by the Academy. And I'm pleased to say that Kathleen received her PhD at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Welcome, Kathleen.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here to celebrate the important legacy that Rudy has given all of us. I'd like to start with a premise that is built on a national probability sample that asked every question we could think of from the available on perceptions of science and scientists. And then factor analyzed back the responses and found that you can predict support for funding science, funding basic research, and you can also predict science consistent behaviors such as accepting the COVID vaccine at the height of the pandemic by whether or not people perceive scientists to be credible, prudent, science and scientists to be unbiased, that is dealing well with their actual human biases, self-correcting. When they find mistakes, they act on them. When they find fraud, they deal with it and put in place remedies, and whether they perceive science to be beneficial. And I take from that analysis that we need to do the best job we can of communicating the norms of science and how we adhere to them as we deal with the question, how do we minimize public susceptibility to misinformation and conspiracy theories about public health? Next slide. And so I'm going to try to build an analysis that says that first, the conspiracy theories that are there have many things in common, among them a general suspicion of anyone in power and a great deal of confidence in individual expertise as opposed to centralized governmental expertise or expertise. But the ones that I'm concerned about suggest that the FDA and CDC are enthralled to the pharmaceutical industry. And as a result, dangerous side effects of vaccines, including deaths, are being covered up. And unless vaccine and useless vaccines are being authorized. And I want to take as my premise, because I'm driving to the argument that we need to tell the story of how science deals with potential biases and engages in self-correction in a positive way that is also nuanced in our understanding about how vaccines actually can produce side effects. So what are the susceptibilities that increase the likelihood that people are going to accept the conspiracy theories that suggest that we've got useless vaccines that are dangerous, that are producing deaths that are being covered up because CDC and FDA are enthralled to the pharmaceutical industry? Well, first, we're creating some susceptibility by calling the vaccine adverse events reporting system the vaccine adverse events reporting system. And I'm going to make that argument. Secondly, we're increasing the susceptibility because the public is largely unfamiliar with the nature of clinical trials and the protections that we have in place in the federal trial structure that leads to authorization or approval to protect the integrity of data. And then the question is, so how do you know that the conspiracists aren't right? I'm going to argue that the treatment of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine is actually a success story because it sidelined a vaccine in favor of other vaccines in the presence of reliable signals detected through VAERS after an approval process that hadn't detected that side effect because the clinical trials couldn't possibly be large enough to detect a side effect that first showed up when we had millions of vaccines distributed. First slide. So what I'm going to argue, next slide, is language can increase understanding, it can confuse, it can increase susceptibility, but in the case of VAERS, it's increasing susceptibility. Next slide. I believe with Kenneth Burke and Coleridge that language does our thinking for us. Next slide. And the vaccine adverse events reporting system puts together nouns that suggest that they are related and hence that the relationship is causal and that the events actually are confirmed in causal relationship to the vaccine. Next slide. And so we see a billboard on a highway that suggests that we've got death signals from the COVID vaccine. VAERS apparently has confirmed them. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. What I'm trying to suggest to you is how prevalent the assumption is that everything that's reported to VAERS has been confirmed as being vaccine caused. Here you see Robert Kennedy Jr. He's talking to a state legislature, and he's suggesting that 19,000 deaths were reported from COVID vaccines. That's his presentation on the placard, more than from all other vaccines combined in 30 years. His inference, this is the deadliest vaccine ever made. His source is VAERS. The problem is the assumption that everything reported is confirmed and vaccine caused. Next slide. He's not the only one who makes that assumption. Again, I'm just going to show you slides to demonstrate prevalence. Next slide. Next slide. How do we know that any event that is reported will be sitting inside that system? A doctor concerned about the deaths being reported as if they were MMR caused, this is pre-COVID, reported that he was experiencing the symptoms that would suggest he was becoming the Incredible Hulk as a result of vaccination, and the report was documented in VAERS. Any report goes into VAERS. Next slide. He then, of course, withdrew the report at the request of Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, but we were able, as a result of seeing that, to confirm to those who are skeptical about the nature of the system and think everything is confirmed, do you think it's plausible that he was actually turning into the Incredible Hulk? No. Now we have a vivid graphic reminder, that's why I have the Hulk on the screen, that anything can be reported if it occurs post-vaccination. Next slide. So what's the problem? First, VAERS asserts a relationship simply by virtue of the relationship of the words in the acronym between the vaccine and the event, where there's not necessarily one. Secondly, saying it's an adverse event makes the event sound serious when non-serious events are also reported and counted. And third, the CDC is actually using a specialized vocabulary that the public doesn't understand when it defines adverse event, because they technically distinguish an adverse event from an adverse reaction, and that is a side effect. And the public hears adverse event to mean side effect, and side effect to mean it must be confirmed as cause. We know that because our survey data, when we ask people about the definition of adverse events, suggests that that confusion exists. Next slide. And so what would I suggest as an alternative? First, let's reduce the susceptibility by changing the name of VAERS. Let's call it a vaccine safety monitor, a vaccine safety watch, or a vaccine safety sentinel, because that's what it's trying to accomplish. It's watching, it's monitoring, it's acting as a sentinel to detect any possible problem, which can then be investigated to find out whether there's a causal relationship and appropriate action taken. The advantage of these alternatives is that they prime safety, not adverse event, and they disassociate vaccine from a presumed confirmed adverse event, thereby breaking the implied causal linkage. Next slide. I also think in the meantime, since we're not going to get the name changed, immediately we should stress every time we say VAERS, its subtitle. It's a national program for monitoring, _monitoring vaccine safety. Next slide. And this qualifier should be appended, and we should teach the public when you hear the word VAERS, VAERS actually means unverified. There's a silent U in VAERS. The V in VAERS stands for unverified. VAERS, unverified, VAERS, unverified. So that when someone makes a VAERS causal claim about something that's reported, the public hears VAERS unverified. There might be a problem there, but we don't know that there is. Let's see what they find after they've investigated. Next slide. Next concern, the public largely does not understand how the independence of the review process protects the integrity of data in clinical trials. And we don't do what we need to explain to people how many different kinds of people are studied before and studied in an environment which some get the vaccine and some don't before an authorization or approval happens. Next slide. I would recommend that as we move to authorize a vaccine, as the FDA appears to be doing with the new RSV vaccine, that we encourage reporters to, in the backdrop, carry the knowledge about the approval process and work through every one of those stages you see on the screen. This is a modified version of an FDA chart that my SideCheck team, which is part of FactCheck, has created. You can find it on our SideCheck website. We know that when you iterate knowledge with the public, you move public through stages in order to get them to an inference. You increase the likelihood, as opposed to just seeing something in a flat environment in a static screen, increase the likelihood that they engage it, that they understand it, that they process it centrally. We need to do more to at least have the public see, look at all those different stages. You have to go through all of those before you get authorization or approval. And then next slide. And we need to increase understanding about the ways in which independent review functions in order to protect the integrity of the review process. Because remember, at the heart of the conspiracy theories about the relationship between FDA, CDC, and the pharmaceutical industry is the assumption that there's no break point between them in which independent individuals, independent of the agencies and the pharmaceutical industry, engage in processes of rigorous review. It's not simply the blinded randomized placebo-controlled trials and the large diverse populations, but we need to increase understanding of those facts. It is the independent Data Safety Review Board, the independent statisticians, the preset thresholds for continuing a trial or ending a trial, and the multiple stages of review simply as multiple stages. That's the point of the earlier chart. Next slide. So my argument is that we've got susceptibilities because VAERS is miscommunicating what it does inadvertently, and because we don't have the levels of public understanding we need of the ways in which protections are in place to ensure the integrity of the data that ultimately comes into the approval process. So how can we say the system actually works? Maybe the conspiracy theorists are right. Next slide. I'm going to tell you a success story. And the success story isn't the J&J vaccine. The success story is the sidelining of the J&J vaccine. So early April, you've got 6 cases of a rare blood clot in 18 to 59-year-old women after receipt of the J&J vaccine. And that signal is picked up in the VAERS system. So the monitoring function worked among the thousands and thousands of cases of reported problems a safety signal came through and a problem was potentially detected. They had not established yet that this was caused by the vaccine. They're looking at it. CDC pauses. As a result, that vaccine is not being used during the pause. And April 13th recommends the pause and then votes to resume after the analysis. By the following year, April 7th, there's 60 rare but noteworthy cases. This is of TTS. You can read the details on the screen. Now we've got 9 deaths, and now we've got confirmation. Now that's of 18,600,000 doses. Next slide. That's how rare that is. That's 1 in 310,000. If we only had the J&J vaccine, you're taking a good bet taking that vaccine against getting COVID if what you're concerned about is death as the outcome. Next slide. But we have other vaccines. So after the link is confirmed, the FDA provides clinical guidance to healthcare providers. Why? It's going to watch for it. And it says, if you see it, here's what not to do, and here's what you ought to do, and it provides guidance. You can see the details on the screen. It also says to every person who gets the vaccine, here's your sheet of paper with warning signs. If you see any of these symptoms, you get right back in touch. Why? Because those are potential symptoms of this disorder. And the flag is particularly there for women in the age ranges that have been identified as being potentially problematic. So that fact sheet is also acting as a protector. Next slide. And by May 2022, based on all of these evaluations and the presence of TTS and the confirmation and the fact that we have other available vaccines that have not shown that safety signal in VAERS, the FDA limits the authorization. It basically sidelines the vaccine. Next slide. I want to tell a success story that says this is how science deals with a pharmaceutical intervention. It dealt with it first by letting the system do what it's supposed to do, identify a signal. Determining it was very rare. Remember that slide I showed you, very, very rare. But an investigation, looking at the risk benefit, and they know they have alternative vaccines because VAERS worked. There's no safety signal about the other vaccines that shows problematic occurrence. And as a result, appropriate cautions are promulgated to relevant audiences and alternative vaccines are recommended. Next slide. So how do we minimize at least some susceptibilities to at least one kind of conspiracy theory? We change the name of VAERS. We increase the understanding of what it does. We show how it works. That's my success story. We increase understanding of the protections that are in place. And importantly, because sometimes they're not actually used the way they're supposed to, we maintain vigilance as a scientific community and as a journalistic community to hold the FDA and CDC accountable for honoring those protections to ensure that before an intervention is put in place for the public, science has given the best advice it possibly can about what is knowable at that point in that moment. And in the process, what we do is celebrate successes and look carefully to failures to ensure that we learn from them so the public gains as much protection as it can from a system of science which is always learning, always updating, always evolving, but has in place reliable norms, forms of self-correction, scientists who are credible, engage in research that does yield life-saving interventions, and also a scientific method that protects them and scientific norms that protects them from all of the human biases and untoward influences with which we all live. I'd be happy to take your comments or questions. And Emily, you can take slides down. Oh, one more slide. Sorry, that's okay. I wanted to thank my team in the last slide, but thank you. You can take.
And for the
thanks, Emily. Thank you.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's fine. Thank you. Take it down.
Thank you, Kathleen, for the clarity, for the rigor, and for such a convincing presentation. It's a lot to absorb in 15 minutes, especially for someone like myself who have thought about all of these things for a long time. But are there any comments or questions from the audience here? I just, Kathleen, I'm a chemist. I work in the lab. I teach in the classroom. I'm beginning to understand what you're sharing with us. Do you have any additional coaching, guiding comments about what, how can I get to be better at doing the kind of effective communication that we all want to do, not only among ourselves, but especially among the public at large.
Yeah, for people who work in the very technical areas of science that the public ordinarily doesn't know a great deal about, one of the most important things that one can do is ensure that as you move the science forward, if it looks as if it's going to involve a public discussion of any sort, if there are any policy implications, to look very carefully at the language in which one is capsulizing the science. So when a very technical part of our science community decided to conventionalize the genetic engineering category as genetic modification and talked about genetic modification of organisms, GMOs, the language of GMO entered the public lexicon because scientists had adopted those imprecise words to characterize what they were doing. And as a result, and Dominique has worked extensively in this area and with the major National Academy of Sciences report on it. As a result, when the advocacy community had unwarranted concerns about the safety of genetically modified organisms, as they called it, and ultimately tried to move labels in place into the various states, and the federal government stepped in to harmonize by putting forward legislation, the federal government and Congress actually had to say, now by GMO, we don't mean genetically modified organism. By GMO, we mean, and then they defined bioengineering. And they did it because literally, if you say genetically modified organism, you're including a whole lot of things that they weren't trying to put labels on. So you'd include virtually everything in the produce aisle. And the confusion could have been minimized if at the very beginning, the scientists who started using the language had said, how is that going to be heard? I have one more quick example. I didn't know what luciferase was. I'm still not completely sure I understand luciferase, but I'm sure many of you do. But when you see the word luciferase, and remember that ultimately, we're ultimately going to be talking about whether something is in a vaccination or a product or not, there are going to be those in some religious communities who are going to see the word Lucifer there. And as a result, because they see the word Lucifer, they're going to think maybe this has to do with the devil, not that the origin here is lux lucis, light. And as a result, you've got an understanding of how you've got light functioning in that environment. So if you see a word where you know there's an association someplace that's completely different, could you please just put comma, comma after the word to define exactly what it is so that we can exclude the possibility that you're engaging in satanic activity?
Thank you, Kathleen. Yes, language is crucial. Words have meaning. And if the meaning is not shared, then we have issues in communication. Please join me in thanking Kathleen for her presentation. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to introduce our next presenter. Shirley Malcom is a senior advisor and director of SEA Change at the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Shirley is a pioneer in engaging women and minorities in science. She has served on the National Science Board and on PCAST, the President's Committee of Advisors on Science and Technology. In 2003, Shirley was awarded the National Academy of Sciences Public Welfare Medal. Shirley works to improve the quality and increase access to education and careers in science for all segments of society. Please welcome Shirley.
Thank you, Bassam. I want to start by telling you my bottom line, and then we can talk about the rest of the issues. The bottom line for me is that we need a lot more people and a lot more diverse populations who are able to respond to the need for scientific information. And the second part of the bottom line is that we have the ability to do something about that in terms of the way that we educate the students that we have with us. Bassam's question that he raised to Kathleen was absolutely the perfect segue. What can we do when we have students as students come through our education system, through our classes and our programs? What can we do to be to support the fact that maybe they will get a call like I did in the middle of the pandemic? my husband came in from the garage and said that my cousin was trying to reach me and that she wanted to talk about COVID. So what did I do? I called her back and she said that she and her sister had been really didn't know what they wanted to do with regard to taking the vaccine. Her sister was immune compromised, and so this was a really important thing that she take the vaccine. Her adult children who lived on social media were telling them not to do it because of all the conspiracy theories that they were citing. And so what do you do in those kinds of roles? What do you do in that case? In my case, I spent 3 hours on a Zoom call trying to talk my cousins into getting the vaccine. The bottom line is that they did get the vaccine. And I had an opportunity to talk to those cousins, their children, and try to understand where they were coming from. But I think that the important part is that we have an opportunity as educators to prepare people to respond, or to at least help them to see where there might be an opportunity. In my role as trustee of Caltech and Regent at Morgan State, and as director of the Sea Change Institutional Transformation Initiative at AAAS, I have opportunities to visit campuses and to meet with students. I enjoy the exchanges. Most students have no idea what trustees are, or what they do, or what they're supposed to do. Some of my fellow trustees may not either, but I like to hear what the students are thinking. And those I've met care a lot about the issue of the day, whether it's climate change, voting rights, environmental justice. And they often seek to figure out what they might do to contribute and to address these. I meet the same kind of energy in those students who applied for and served in the AAAS Mass Media Science and Engineering Fellows Program, and those who are interns in the AAAS Diverse Voices programs that place students within science. Those students I have met want to be a part of the solution to the challenges we seem to have in bridging the scientist-public's divide. But that requires some intentionality on the part of the larger scientific enterprise, not just for those who might seek out special opportunities, but as an aspect of educating these students in the disciplines, helping them develop the life skills and useful skills for future careers, but also that are critical as the health of the enterprise as we interact with others across society. This means valuing this kind of communication, providing opportunities to learn and to practice. It also means seeing our students as our major legacy and supporting their development as scientists and as messengers for science. It also means developing a larger commitment to developing diverse voices to engage with our many publics. Sometimes when I raise issues of rethinking education in science and engineering, especially about intentionality, including educating our students for their civic role, I get pushback. There was a scientist policymaker from a funding agency who essentially told me that students are byproducts of the research he was funding. A secondary result, unintended, but inevitably produced in doing or producing something else, something that might be more valued. And others who think of students as workers or helpers or acolytes, or some other terms that come about, and not in terms of their potential role and their future roles that we need them to assume in the enterprise. In celebrating the life of Rudy Baum, a person who cared deeply about his role as guide, mentor, and champion of students, excuse me, I decided to focus on the importance of educating the next generation, focusing on whom we educate, what we educate them to do, and how we educate them. Over the past few years, we have been inundated with focus on Vannevar Bush and his report, Science: The Endless Frontier, and his notion that the research that should be carried out should be done so within colleges and universities. so that in the process of educating the next generation, we basically get the research done at the same time. Decades later, I was a member of the National Science Board with Dick Zare when a new strategic plan returned to and underscored the value of this integration of research and education. If we think about how we educate in that kind of setting, we see both the opportunity to involve students directly in research, as well as to involve them in understanding the importance of research in moving science forward and in understanding how science works. So what do we want the education to provide? How science works. I think that Kathleen was absolutely on point in terms of the importance of students, of all people coming to understand this fundamental idea. Certainly we want students to see the sense of the present knowledge, the state of the present knowledge. I would also hope that they would understand enough about the history of science to see where that present knowledge comes from, how it was replaced, what it replaced, how the understandings evolved over time, the whole idea of self-correction of new inputs, and who was and who was not allowed to do science, and more. That is, science as a social construction. Certainly, some ideas about how science is done technically, the language, the tools, the equipment, the techniques. This was an area where I had problems in college chemistry, I'm willing to confess, that almost totally derailed my aspirations in science. Going back to this question of who is seen as doing science, my under-resourced segregated high school in the Jim Crow South was a clear political statement of whom was seen as science capable of science worthy, and I didn't make the list. Interestingly, friends from Birmingham of my generation were able to overcome some of these impact of these lower investments by having teachers' high expectations fuel their persistence, but also they studied in HBCUs, historical Black colleges and universities, where they were nurtured and helped to overcome the technical deficiencies of their high schools in ways that were supportive and non-judgmental. CNN has covered this issue of the role of HBCUs in making outsized contribution to the chemistry education of Black Americans, as well as their role in the baccalaureate origins institutions. But there are other aspects of educating the next generation as well that run as themes through stories about Rudy Baum. What research is worth doing? What are important problems? What is excellent work? What do we have to do to share our knowledge, both within and beyond our community? How do we, and why should we tackle controversial issues? How do we affect and influence those conversations? Rudy Baum knew his audiences and was a trusted voice within the chemistry community. He used that trust and that opportunity to voice the issues to celebrate the field, but not just to celebrate it, but also to call out what the field had not done and to try and influence its direction. When the pandemic hit in March 2020, the importance of clear messages and trusted messengers became incredibly clear. And the fact that we had neither clear communication nor clear and trusted communicators also became clear. And I think that Kathleen has made the point for us that sometimes in trying to talk about things that we're comfortable with, in ways that we're comfortable with, we basically move in the opposite direction of helping others to understand that. Those of us who've been trained as scientists and who lived through the pandemic have become jaded, or perhaps I should say weary. We don't understand all the time how people can have access to a vaccine and choose not to take it, or that people can seek out therapeutics that are untested, shown to be ineffective or downright lethal. I think the same kinds of issues relate to climate change. The signs are around us, the facts are there, but this is a case of where we maybe spend too much time in our own bubble, where we expect people to behave rationally And this is not always the case. So over the years, we were being educated. If we were fortunate, we were taught how to develop proposals or write journal articles or prepare an abstract or do a poster session or interact with others in our fields. I don't know about you, but my preparation did not include giving public presentations to many different and sometimes skeptical audiences, preparing and delivering testimony, trying to influence and persuade, doing editorials. Those are skills I had to learn on the job. Apparently, Rudy was a big proponent of learning on the job. Fortunately, my lived experience included large doses of an oral tradition, storytelling acquired through interactions in community, church, and family. The science students I have met remain optimistic and willing and eager to share their science. How can we help them acquire and practice the skills of a messenger? How do we help them understand what it means to be worthy of trust and how to gain and retain trust? What do we need to do to educate the next generation of messengers? Obviously, engaging with and coming to understand different audiences. And I think that this is a major problem within our community. Valuing the skills and strategies to share science with others, finding and exploring topics of relevance to different audiences, even when it might stir controversy, or maybe especially when it might stir controversy, since discussion might be useful. And going forward, I think we're going to have to see how we influence our students and how we partner with community-based and other groups that might share these interests and who might be helped to share these interests. Thank you.
Shirley, as always, you stayed on time and purposeful. Thank you so much. Shirley and I go back, shall I tell?
A long way.
Okay, a long way.
A lot of decades.
And we're comrades in arms, although we're both very peaceful people, but that's an expression and I'd like to say this clearly. I'm using the AAAS motto, advancing science and serving society. And I want you to know who is responsible for this motto. Shirley. Any questions, any comments from the audience here? The last three presenters in this symposium really helped us connect better as a society with the public at large. And I'd just like to share with you a statement. I'll read the statement, even though I wrote this statement. I want to read it to make sure I get it accurately. Science and society have what is essentially a social contract that enables great intellectual achievements, but comes with mutual expectations of benefiting the human condition and protecting our planet. All themes championed by Rudy. So are there any comments for Shirley? Shirley, thank you so much for being with us. Three non-chemists participated in this symposium. Again, in keeping with truly living the legacy of Rudy Baum. So please join me in thanking Shirley. Thank you. Thank you so much, Shirley. Our next speaker, well, we have a couple of minutes. And I'd like to, because it's also remote and pre-recorded. Are you ready for it? If you're ready, we can start. Yes, so I'd like to introduce our next speaker then. Holden Thorp is the editor-in-chief of the Science family of journals. He has served as chancellor of the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, also as provost at Washington University in St. Louis. Holden is on the National Board of Directors of the Public Broadcasting System. And I can't help but say to you that he received his PhD in chemistry at Caltech in 3 years working with Harry Gray. Please welcome Holden.
Hello, everyone. I'm Holden Thorp. I'm the editor-in-chief of Science. It's a great honor to be here today with so many old friends, and also to is the great Rudy Baum. I have a very similar job to the one that Rudy had, in that I'm the editor of a journal and a magazine, but the front half of Science is a magazine just like CNE News, and I write editorials and manage commentary and news reporting just like Rudy did. And so a lot of the way I do my job today is based on things that I observed Rudy doing over the years. I want to talk about mostly Rudy's commentary writing and how he did that, since that's something that I do every week as well. And we have a lot to learn from Rudy and what he did for us. The first is that he wasn't afraid to share his views, and those included views about politics. A lot of people, in my view, mistakenly think that scientists should stay out of politics, that we should be objective people who just put things in journals and don't show our opinions to the world. I don't think that's a good idea, as anyone who follows me could understand, and Rudy didn't either, and neither did Albert Einstein, because Albert Einstein said that it would be irresponsible if scientists stayed out of politics, and I agree with Albert Einstein, and Rudy did as well. So I'll just tell you a little bit about Science. If you take a print issue of Science, the old-fashioned ones, we still print 50,000 of them every week, and you rip it down the middle. In one hand, you'll have a world-class research journal with an impact factor of 63. We publish 700 to 750 papers every year out of 12,000, so it's very selective. But in your other hand, you would have a magazine that has investigative reporting and daily news and commentary. So it's sort of like if you had CNE News in one hand and Jax in the other, and you took them and glued them together. And I have the privilege of being responsible for all of that, and it's really fun and a great honor to do. We have 5 sister research journals, and you're probably familiar with those. Our news group includes 30 award-winning staff writers, editors, and correspondents all over the world. We do investigative reporting on things like sexual harassment in science, fraud in science, drama in the federal agencies. We have a working life column that appeals to a lot of young graduate students and postdocs and young faculty members, and that is a very popular part. And we do big packages like the one I show here, which was done addressing why there are so few Black physicists and looking at the underlying reasons for that. And as you can see, we invest a lot in the way our journal looks and the way that our illustrations help people understand science. And then we also have a commentary section. That section includes things written by other scientists about science, the editorials that I write every week or solicit, letters. Just these, both of these are in CNE News, book reviews, policy forums, which is a venue that we created to talk about major issues facing the world of science policy, and then perspectives where we get authors who are not part of scientific papers to write about them or to write short review articles. So that's Science very quickly. And really, I want to talk about why it's so important for scientists to be involved in politics and why Rudy was such a good role model for us. So this happened in my lifetime, and certainly in Rudy's lifetime. There was a time when science was revered and respected throughout the country and around the world, when John F. Kennedy could announce we were going to the moon and motivate people and get them excited about it. And just within my lifetime, we've gone from that to a point where we have a lot of resentment about science, people accusing us of groupthink and making things up that suit our political agendas, and a deep misunderstanding of the process of science and how it is that scientists are individuals who have opinions and make mistakes and do great things. But science, the community, has the ability to reach consensus, vet findings, and produce ideas and principles that are reliable. And we have done a really lousy job of telling the world about that. And that is not the only reason, because there have been a lot of political actors who have sought to undermine us, but we made it easy for them with a lot of the things that we've done. And that's what I write about, and it's also what Rudy was quite focused on often. So here's the backdrop of this. This is a Pew study, and if you look on the left, you see some good news, which is that scientists are still held in very high regard by almost 80% of Americans, right up there with the military. Something that's been pretty consistent for a lot of years. But if you look over on the right, you see that a lot of people believe that scientists should be something that doesn't exist, which are sort of non-human creatures that sit in a lab and put things into journals, but not play an active role in policy debates. And there's a partisan divide on that. Republicans tend to be more likely to think, and 2/3 of them think this, that we should not be involved in policy. And Democrats are flipped the other way. 2/3 of them want scientists involved in setting policy. And this causes something that happens a lot to me and happened a lot to Rudy, as you can see in the letters to the editor, where people write in and tell us to stick to science. First of all, if we did that, we'd have very boring editorial pages. But second of all, it contributes to a myth that I believe, and I think Rudy believed, was not good for science. And that was for people to think that we were not human beings who had opinions. And furthermore, to not give us the opportunity to explain to people that science is a collective endeavor, not something done by lone geniuses. So I always remind people when they tell me to stick to science that in fact, science is both a magazine in the front half and a research journal in the second half. And magazines have editorial points of view and editorial pages where we express opinions, and we have all kinds of opinions in the insight section of science. That's what makes it engaging and interesting to read. So Rudy, I think, was, if you go back and look at it, very generous with a lot of his critics. These are some of the things that he put on his own letters page that people wrote about him, and the frequent liberal spew. I think that's something that I've received myself a few times, and people accusing him of using C&E News to promote his ideology, when in fact it's very clearly labeled his opinion, what he was writing. And some of this is pretty unfortunate, but you know, I'm going to cancel my membership. That's something I get a lot too. So there are a lot of people who threaten to cancel their memberships in the ACS and the AAAS because of the opinion pages of Science and C&E News. But Rudy was very convicted about a lot of important things and ahead of his time. Here's a piece that he wrote about climate change and how important it was, and taking apart a paper that was apparently about climate change, but was in the Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons. And this journal is a very prominent source of misinformation, both on climate, but more importantly on, it has been caused a lot of problems and put a lot of bad information out there about COVID. So Rudy was certainly right about this journal, and the events of the last 2 or 3 years have shown that, but the people who agreed with the positions that were in these in this journal and related sources criticized him for doing that. And this is really important because the people writing the letters that are in C&E News, most of them probably are ACS members or certainly at least chemists with training in chemistry. But it's been pretty common, and you can read a lot about this in this particular book, which I recommend to you, that most misinformation that we tend to complain about actually starts inside the scientific community. And here's the obituary of someone who did a lot on this, Fred Seitz. He was an excellent solid state physicist, but in the latter part of his career, he stopped publishing in peer-reviewed journals, and instead he wrote white papers and op-eds and pieces from conservative think tanks about how global warming was fabricated by scientists and not something that we needed to worry about. But because of his scientific credentials, he was able to provide a lot of useful information to people who wanted to undermine climate change and addressing it. And so it's certainly the case that Fred Seitz did not stay out of politics. And the very people who would accuse me or Rudy Baum or someone like that of being in politics are likely to be people who agreed with Fred Seitz, and he certainly did not follow their advice either. So I think it's probably better for us to address this, and I think certainly Rudy wanted to do that. And that's something we should all be grateful for. Okay, Rudy also had some things to say about open access. So I think many of you probably know that we are now under the Nelson memo, which requires us to make scientific research available immediately somehow. Rudy was skeptical about all of this from the beginning. He saw right through the open access movement and what they were trying to achieve. It was really the radical change of the scientific enterprise. I'll show you a quote from him on the second page that shows that he knew what they were up to. Unfortunately, most scientists didn't pay attention to this, and now we have massive changes in the publication of science that a lot of scientists don't even know is coming about. Rudy was trying to talk about this from the very beginning. I noticed, and I regret that this is the case if it's true, I could not find a lot of editorials about open access in C&E News in recent years. And that is unfortunate because the ACS has taken some strong steps, some very definitive steps in terms of how they're going to manage this. And given the profitability of the ACS journals and the way they're managed, I think these are things that the scientific community should be discussing. The ACS, for example, is allowing something called hybrid journals, which is where they get a subscription from the libraries, but they also get a fee to make papers open access at the same time. And it appears from the announcements that they've made that they're going to be going to what's called a read and publish agreement, which is where schools have to pay both to read the journals and to publish. And that means that schools that can't pay for read and publish agreements might not have a way for their faculty to publish in ACS journals, and that would really harm institutions that don't have the same amount of resources. He wrote another piece which was very prescient because the last line of this is, and this was in 2004, this is unlikely to satisfy open access advocates who will continue to push for immediate posting of the research. And that is something that we have now reached, and we have reached it without a lot of awareness and buy-in from the academic community. And we are on our back foot about that, and we should have listened to Rudy when we had the chance. The AAAS has its own policy about this. We do not think that it is ethical to publish a subscription journal and take a fee to make a paper open access at the same time. We don't have any plans to do that. What we're doing is we're taking the accepted version of the manuscript and allowing that to be posted wherever the author wants to post it. This is something we've allowed for a long time. The federal government has endorsed this. It gets around having people who don't have resources to do so being forced to pay a fee to make their paper open access. And we think that's a much more equitable way to do it. And it would be nice to see this kind of thing being discussed in the op-ed pages of CNE News. It's certainly a major issue for the ACS. Okay, now there's an elephant in the room since we're all here, and I just want to go ahead and address it. Anybody watching this talk almost would know that recently the ACS decided initially to move CNE News into the ACS Communications Division. That was met with a lot of unhappiness from many ACS members, including myself, but also much more prominent researchers than I am. And unfortunately, it also led to the departure of a lot of people at CNE News that many of us had valued working with. We don't know much about the ACS's reasons for doing this. I and many others encouraged ACS management to answer questions about this on the record. They haven't done that, which is a little ironic for an organization that has a news magazine, but you know, personnel decisions are complicated, and I've been through hard ones myself. So, you know, unfortunately, we don't have a lot of information about why this happened. The good news is that CNE News was recently moved back to the ACS Publications Division, and we should all be grateful for that, despite our unhappiness with the way this all went down. And I guess at this point, we have just one thing that we can do, and that is to see if CNE News continues to be the source of news and journalism that has inspired us all and that we have come to rely on, and that celebrates the legacy of Rudy Baum. So that's a good place to end this talk, to tell you that I work with a lot of brilliant people. Here's my research colleagues. Here are our visual colleagues that make science the most beautiful journal in the world. And thanks again for including me to talk with you all. Okay, and I'm here. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know how to get myself on the screen.
Okay, so we need to get Holden. Can we get Holden on the screen? It's at your end, I think, Holden.
I don't know how to do it.
Okay, well, we'll.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Can Antoine put my video up there? It should be in there.
You can hear me.
They have to do that in the room. Just give them 2 seconds.
Oh, there I am. Okay.
Are there any questions, comments, reflections?
Well, let me just say one thing, and that is it's always an honor to be with Shirley and Dominique and Kathleen. They're much more experienced and sophisticated about science communication than I am. I'm kind of like Rudy. I've taught myself all this stuff. And I think that Dominique said something very important, which is that misinformation is mostly driven by ideology and religion, not necessarily by our ability to explain things. And that is a very important thing that I hear from a lot of scientists that they don't understand. They write to me and say, make more cool videos so people will understand climate change and evolution. And I don't think that's the answer. And Dominique and Kathleen for sure have helped us understand that. And I showed an editorial about open access that was written by Shirley Malcom along with Sudha Parikh and Bill Moran, our publisher. So she's, as Bassam said, showed us a lot of stuff. So it's an honor to be with the three of them and all of you. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, we have a please, Sarah.
Hi, Holden. This is Sarah Tegan. In addition to my hat as interim publisher for CNN, I also wear a hat of being a senior vice president and overseeing the journal's publishing group at ACS. And I just wanted to correct a little bit of misinformation. So it's true that ACS journals are supported in part by subscription revenue, but also in part by open access revenue. And our subscription prices and subscription revenue is only for content that is actually behind the firewall. We are not double dipping, as the term of art in the industry leads one to believe, so that we're not actually gaining revenue from both the open access articles, APCs, and subscription revenue at the same time. So just wanted to clear that up, that those are separate pots of money. And the second, your point about equity in open access is an important one. I absolutely agree with you there. And we've just inked our first deals with primarily undergraduate institutions who are not prime publishers in our journals. They are a lot of our readership, though. And we now have some deals on the table where those faculty members will be able to publish open access in our journals for free as well. So just wanted to clear up a little bit of misinformation. I think we're all on the side of making sure that science has the broadest public access as possible.
Yeah, and good for you for doing that. I think that the most important thing that we all have to do is to try to get the rest of the world of science to understand that this is happening. Because when I talk to people who don't come to these kinds of meetings with us, they have no clue about all of this. So I hope you'll use CNE News and any other channels you have to very aggressively get the word out about this.
Anyone else?
Mort Hoffman has his hand up on the screen. And he's on mute. You're on mute, Mort.
So please.
There we go. Okay, I'm on. Thank you. I think that if we reflect back on the pandemic, and we do that very, very often, the lessons learned and how to go forward on this to avoid the misinformation and so forth. It seems to me that there are three very, very strong influence factors dealing with public policy, opinion, and action on these kind of things, such as the pandemic or anything else that is going to come up, climate change and all the rest. Those three things are, first of all, the science. What's the truth? What do we know? What we don't know? And how we're going to find out. The second impacts society and the individual, and that's economics. We saw with the pandemic, restaurants had to close and businesses didn't have patrons, and that had an enormous effect. And then the third thing, which is overriding all of this, is of course politics, and it cannot be ignored. And so I think the word out that scientists must understand not only our science, but also the economics, and be absolutely forthright about the talk about politics. We have our 24/7 cable news with loads and loads of politics and social media. Oh my God, social media. And it's there, and the misinformation is going to be tossed out. And we're going to have to do our best as purveyors of the search for the truth as we possibly can. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Let me just say something about that. I mean, I learned a lot about this from Kathleen, who I think is still on the call, but I think that a lot of people tend to sort of wince when we say what our political views are, but they're going to find them out eventually anyway. So, it's probably better to say, yes, we're human beings who have opinions, including opinions about politics, but we participate in the social process of science, which ultimately is self-correcting, and where when the community of science validates our findings, that's when they become knowledge, not when we initially publish them. And if we could get people to understand that, then we could get past this notion that, oh, well, Holden Thorp's a liberal, so therefore everything in science is something that only he, conforms to his political views, which of course I get on social media, and then the conservative press and Rudy did too. That's not really the point. The point is that human beings do science, and we do it collectively. And when we publish it and it's vetted by the scientific community, then eventually it becomes knowledge, and that washes out a lot, whatever motivated reasoning and individual bias and every human trait that we bring to science. And it's a slog to get from where we are to where people can actually understand this, because we love to talk about all these individual geniuses who have done all this. But of course, a good example is, evolution didn't become knowledge the day The Origin of Species showed up in the bookstore or the library. It became knowledge after 100 years or more of people showing the molecular basis of it and commenting on it and figuring out that Alfred Russel Wallace actually discovered the same thing and all of this stuff. So, of course, Darwin did a lot of amazing things. But maybe we shouldn't have, posters of him all over every biology lab, because it's not just him at all that did all the things that gave us evolution, for example.
Well, The Origin of Species was probably banned, was a book that was probably banned, just as Galileo's ideas were banned. I mean, it's all through history. It's all through history. The big challenge is how to get the public, as you said, to understand this. And that's the tricky business. I think we have to go out and talk.
Yeah, well, I write for other scientists, not the public. So Kathleen and Dominique are probably better to comment on that.
I don't know if they're still on, but I'd just like to say the obvious. Has anyone held back during this symposium from saying what they want to say?
No.
It's truly an important part of living Rudy's legacy, to be expressive and to be responsible in what we express. And we all have tendencies to point the finger. My appeal to all of us is to help point the way as we join together in being truly responsible members of the ACS in the way we live and in living Rudy's legacy. So please join me in thanking Holden for joining us here. And I can't tell you how pleased I am with the way everything has happened so far today. The speakers, when I invited them, without hesitation said yes, and they spoke from their heart. So that's very pleasing to me. So I thank each of the speakers for their contributions. I'm sorry that Harry Gray is unable to present his contribution. We wish him well and look forward to seeing him. And I'd like, if Jan is ready, to perhaps call on you to would you please? I don't know. I'll give you the microphone I have because I know this one works. Whatever you want. Okay, try that one. Okay.
Sick? Are we on now? Okay, good. So yes, I'm actually pretty overwhelmed at this point. Yeah, I was an elementary school teacher, and so I can talk in front of third graders for like the whole day, but this is an entirely different audience. So I'm just going to keep this brief. I couldn't leave though without just expressing my thanks to everyone for being here in this room, the people who are watching from afar, and the speakers. I'm so touched by just the outpouring of appreciation and respect for Rudy and his body of work. As you all know, communicating science was his lifelong mission. He took great pride in his ability to do that. And I think most of you who either knew him personally or worked with him or both would agree that it's an understatement to say that he was a man of strong convictions. So this is a theme, right? We've heard this all day. He never shied away from expressing those opinions. And on any topic, controversial, not controversial, just didn't matter. And there were many people who disagreed with him. Yeah. Some of you probably, but it seemed like everybody always defended his right to express that point of view. And so that was really important. I do like to think that maybe he even changed a few people's minds along the way about some of those issues that he wrote about, especially climate change, because that was, of course, the thing he was most passionate about in his whole tenure at CNN, or the magazine, as we called it, because there was only really one magazine. But he would be so honored today, as I am, by all of your presence. And our children could not be here, but I did bring my posse. So Rudy's sister, Mariana, my sisters, Judy and Jackie, as Bassam already introduced you, my nieces, Anna and Whitney, all traveled to Indianapolis to be here today. And I thank you so much for doing that. I do have to give a little shout out to Denise Creech, who unfortunately couldn't be here. She planned to be here, but through a series of travel, I don't know, what would we call that? Yeah, it was really a shame. She wanted to be here. So Denise, I hope you're still paying attention, because shout out to you. She and Rudy connected years ago over their Duke connection, and especially Duke basketball. Go Blue Devils, even though I know they're out of the tournament, but okay. Anyway, they became close friends, but she also is a close friend of mine as well. Many thanks, of course, to all the speakers. I don't know most of you personally, but I recognize most of the names. And I just appreciate all the time and effort that went into preparing your talks and giving them. And I know that even a couple of these people were not just colleagues of Rudy's, but personal friends as well. They probably, if Harry was here, he might have some tales to tell. But Madeleine, I have to single out Madeleine, because of course, because I do. Madeleine, Rudy said many times over the years that you were the most important person, the most influential person in terms of his career at ACS. Of course, you convinced him, you saw his potential, or else maybe you just took a chance, I don't know, but convinced him to come back from his one-person office in California to headquarters, and all went from there. You were the person he reported to, but he always considered you his mentor as well. And of course, you just made such a great team working together. So more than that, even beyond all that, you just have become a close friend to him and to me. And I thank you for everything. But the last person I need to thank this morning, of course, Bassam. I was so moved when you contacted me last year to say that you were going to put this symposium together. And I can't think of a better way to honor Rudy's legacy. Appreciate all of the hard work that went into organizing this. And Rudy would have been humbled and honored by this, as I am. And it's been a remarkable morning. So thank you so much, Bassam, from the bottom of my heart for doing this. Thank you. And thank you everyone for doing it.
Thank you, Jan, very much. I know you've heard me say this. We remember Rudy, but we live his legacy. And this is what this symposium was all about. And I'd like to, as we come to the conclusion here, of course, thank Jan and the family for being here. I was going to participate remotely. Jan told me she and the family are coming. I decided to come. Personal connections are very important. There are cerebral connections, there are emotional connections. That's what we do in chemistry, that's what we do in science, that's what we do as we live with other people in our communities, as we live in society. And I want to express also thanks to the ACS. I called Tom Conley shortly after Rudy died, and I said, Tom, we should do something. He said, whatever you suggest. So I made my suggestion. I then called Jan to make sure she's okay with this. So I want to express thanks to our former CEO, Tom, for making all of this possible. I want to also express thanks to Latrice Garrison, the Chief Operating Officer of ACS, for doing a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that this symposium is held and recorded and to be played for others who wish to watch it. I also want to thank her senior executive assistant, Chanel Bragg. Chanel has without Chanel, I would have drowned a long time ago. And I used to be a swimming champion in my early youth in Lebanon. You know, I was the junior swimming champion of Lebanon, but I would have drowned without you, Chanel. So thank you so much for that. And I again thank each of the speakers for their very significant contributions and how everyone participated in properly relating and connecting what Rudy did, what he stood for, and what we all must continue to do. And I thank the audience for being here. And I hope future ACS meetings will be also rich in content and also rich in properly and effectively connecting chemistry with society. Science and society have to be connected together. And we heard this throughout the morning, and let us all go and practice what we believe in. Thank you all very much for being here, and thank you for participating in this symposium.